By the third time Lucy came back to my chair, she was still smiling. "Maybe they didn't hear me," she whispered, smoothing the little paper bracelet she had made for her cousins. I watched her try again. One group, then another, until my nephew finally blurted out what every child there had already been told. Grandma said kids with their biological parents should play together. My mother didn't deny it. My sister made it worse. I hugged Lucy and said only, "Understood." 12 hours later, that same sister walked into my office, saw me and screamed, "No, she can't be here." I didn't understand why until she said my daughter's birth mother's name. If you've ever had to protect a child from the people who were supposed to love her, stay with me. That Saturday morning had begun with lemon zest on my kitchen counter and strips of construction paper scattered across the table. Lucy sat cross-legged on one of the dining chairs, her bare feet hooked around the rung, carefully writing names in purple marker. She had decided every cousin needed a bracelet before we went to my mother's barbecue. Not the plastic bead kind she usually made after school. Paper loops, cut from 3 different colors, with each child's name printed in the neatest letters an 8-year-old could manage. She held one up to the light, frowned, and started over because the L in Nolan looked too squished. I told her nobody was grading the bracelets. "I know," she said. "I just want them to look good." That was Lucy. She said things like that with a casualness that could fool you if you didn't know what to listen for. On the counter beside me, the lemon bars were cooling in my mother's old metal pan. Lucy had asked 2 weeks earlier what Grandma's favorite dessert was. I had said lemon bars without thinking. She remembered. Then she asked if we could make them together for the barbecue, and she spent most of the morning insisting the powdered sugar had to reach all 4 corners because Grandma liked things. I was slicing the bars when Lucy looked toward the hallway. "Should I wear the blue dress or the yellow one?" "Whichever one you like." She considered that, then asked, "What are Ava and Emma wearing?" I turned with the knife still in my hand. "Why?" "So I can match." The answer came too quickly. I set the knife down. "You don't have to match anybody." "I know." She gave me the same small smile she used when she wanted to close a subject without seeming rude. "I just thought it would be fun." There was a blue backpack, leaning against the bottom stair behind her. It was old enough that the fabric had gone pale at the corners, and one zipper pull had been replaced with a loop of red cord. She no longer carried it to school. She had a newer backpack with planets on it for that. The blue one lived mostly in her closet now. But that morning, she had brought it downstairs because she wanted to take her sketchbook to Grandma's in case the older kids got bored and wanted to draw. Every time I saw that bag, I remembered the first night it had arrived in my house. Lucy had been a little over 5 then, small enough that the backpack looked too wide for her shoulders. A county worker carried in a trash bag of clothing and a plastic tote with paperwork. Lucy carried the backpack herself. She did not cry. She did not cling to the worker. She stood in my entryway, in pink sneakers, and asked where I wanted her shoes, not where her room was. Not whether she could have something to eat. Where I wanted her shoes. I had been a licensed foster parent long enough to know that quiet did not mean comfortable. Sometimes it meant a child was trying to take up as little room as possible. I showed her the room at the end of the hall. I had made the bed with plain green sheets, because I had learned not to decorate a temporary room with a stranger's imagined personality. There was a lamp, an empty dresser, 2 shelves, and a nightlight still in its package on the desk. Lucy stood in the doorway for almost a minute. "Is all that mine?" she asked. "For as long as you're here." I hated the sentence as soon as I heard it. It was technically honest and emotionally useless. She nodded anyway. That night, she put her toothbrush in the bathroom and 1 pair of pajamas in the dresser. Everything else stayed in the blue backpack, or the trash bag. The next morning, I found the backpack zipped and sitting beside the bed. A few days later, when I asked whether she wanted help putting the rest of her clothes away, she said, "It's easier when I have to go. No drama, no tears. She said it while lining up socks. I didn't tell her she would never have to go. At that point, I couldn't promise that. So I did the smaller things I could promise. Breakfast would be at 7. I would pick her up from after-school care, unless someone told her otherwise. Her toothpaste would still be in the same cup tomorrow. If she left a library book on the couch, I would not pack it for her. The first month, she asked permission for everything. Could she open the refrigerator? Could she use the purple towel? Could she leave a drawing on the table overnight? If I bought strawberries, she ate exactly 3 until I told her she could have more. When she spilled milk, she apologized before the glass finished rolling. By the 3rd month, she left socks under the coffee table. I had never been so happy to see a mess. Trust did not arrive in one cinematic moment. It arrived in crumbs. A hair tie left on the bathroom sink. A jacket thrown over the kitchen chair. A half-finished craft project occupying my table for 3 days, because Lucy believed the table would still be there when she came back to it. When the permanency plan finally shifted, and the adults around her began using the word adoption, I was the one who had to decide whether I meant all the ordinary promises I had been teaching her to trust. I did. The adoption was finalized the previous fall. There was no grand ballroom, no dramatic speech, no instant erasing of what had come before. We went to court in clothes Lucy hated, because she said the tights itched. She held my hand so tightly during the hearing that my fingers tingled. Afterward, we ate pancakes for lunch because she chose the restaurant. A week later, I noticed the blue backpack was empty for the first time. Not gone. Empty. Her clothes were in the dresser. I thought that meant the hardest part was behind us. For a while, my mother seemed to think so too. Diane Walsh had not been one of those relatives who openly objected when I first became a foster parent. In fact, she surprised me. She brought over a winter coat before the first cold snap. She remembered Lucy hated grape jelly and kept strawberry jam in her refrigerator. Once, when Lucy fell asleep on Mom's couch during a Sunday football game, Mom draped a blanket over her and lowered the television without being asked. That was why I spent so long explaining away what came later. The shift began during the adoption process, though I did not understand that at the time. Mom was at my kitchen table one evening while I sorted paperwork into stacks. Lucy was upstairs reading. I had been talking about the family history information I was allowed to keep for Lucy someday, the things I wanted organized so she would never have to wonder whether I had hidden her first life from her. I said her birth mother's full name, Allison Reed. My mother's hand stopped halfway to her coffee. It was a tiny movement. If I had been looking down at the papers, I might have missed it. Allison Reed? She repeated. Yes. Reed? I remember smiling because I thought she was trying to place the name from somewhere. Central Ohio is full of people who discover they went to school with somebody's cousin. She died before Lucy entered care, I said. You know that. Mom looked at the papers nearest my elbow, then at me. I know. That was all. She asked whether Allison had family. I told her I only knew there had been no successful kinship placement by the time Lucy came to me. Mom nodded once, finished her coffee, and left earlier than she usually did. I did not connect that conversation to anything for months. The changes were small enough to have innocent explanations. At Christmas, Mom wanted one picture with the biological grandkids first, before bringing Lucy in for the bigger group shot. The bigger shot never happened because one child started crying and another spilled cider on the rug. I was irritated, but I told myself Mom was 61, set in her language, and still learning what adoption meant inside a family instead of on a television commercial. When my sister Claire organized a cousin's movie night at Mom's, Lucy was not invited. Claire said the other kids had been doing it for years, and that adding someone new might make things awkward. I reminded her that Lucy was 8, not a visiting executive who needed onboarding. Claire laughed, apologized, and said we would do something all together next time. Next time turned into another next time. Mom never said Lucy was not family. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, there were categories. The biological grandkids. The kids who grew up together. The original four. And then there was Lucy. Always addressed warmly enough that I could feel unreasonable for noticing the line. Lucy noticed it differently. She did not complain about being outside the line. She tried to qualify for the inside. She learned that my mother liked napkins folded under the forks instead of beside them, and started helping set the table before anyone asked. She remembered that Ava loved horses, and drew one in her birthday card. She heard Nolan say he liked sour candy, and saved the green pieces from a bag for him. At family dinners, she volunteered to carry empty plates to the sink. At birthdays, she sat on the edge of the group until someone made room instead of asking them to move. The more uncertain she felt, the more useful she became. I saw it. I just kept telling myself time would fix it. Part of that was guilt. I had brought Lucy into a family with rules she had not written, then asked her to be patient while the adults caught up. Part of it was history. My mother had always been the person who decided how our family did things, where Thanksgiving was held, which argument was worth discussing, which one needed to be dropped for peace. Claire had adapted to that system better than I had. I was older, more stubborn, and usually the one who left a family dinner, wishing I had said less or said more. So when Claire told me not to push Mom too hard about Lucy, I heard sisterly advice, not a warning. She'll get there, Claire told me last spring. You know how Mom is with change. I did know. That was the problem. By late August, I had turned Mom's discomfort into a story I could live with. She loved Lucy, but she did not yet understand how to show it without comparing adoption to biology. It was not a flattering story, but it was fixable. Patience, boundaries, more time together. That was my plan. Then, in the week before the barbecue, something shifted in Claire, too. 3 days before the party, she stopped by my house to return a casserole dish. She looked polished, as always white jeans, gold hoops, hair pulled back, but she checked her phone 4 times in 10 minutes. On the 5th time it rang, she stepped onto my porch. I wasn't trying to listen. I was rinsing the dish at the sink, with the window cracked open. Nathan, I know, she said, low and sharp. A pause. You said it was a review. Then let them review it. Another pause. No, don't send anything until you know what they're asking for. I shut off the faucet. Claire came back inside a minute later with the expression she used when she wanted everyone to agree nothing had happened. Everything okay? Work stuff. With Nathan? She rolled her eyes, but there was no humor in it. Fleet paperwork, insurance people. He makes every review sound like the FBI is landing on the roof. That explanation fit Nathan perfectly. He ran Mercer Fleet and logistics like every delayed invoice was a personal attack. I had heard him complain about insurance renewals, safety forms, lenders, fuel costs, driver shortages, anything that put another person between him and the way he wanted to run his company. So I let it go. Lucy came into the kitchen carrying a drawing of a blue semi-truck she had made at summer camp. Uncle Nathan, does he have trucks this big? She asked Claire. Claire looked at the picture, then toward the porch, where her phone still sat in her hand. Something like that. A few minutes later, Nathan called again. Claire left without finishing her coffee. I remember watching her back out of my driveway and thinking marriage must be exhausting when your husband treated routine business problems like emergencies. I did not think about Allison Reed. I did not think about Lucy's old backpack. I did not think my mother's strange pause at my kitchen table had anything to do with my brother-in-law's company. Those things belonged in separate boxes in my mind. Saturday morning, Lucy finished the bracelets just before noon. She had 6 of them lined in a row, and 1 extra, in case she had forgotten somebody. I packed the lemon bars while she disappeared upstairs to change. She came back in the blue dress. Good choice, I said. Emma wears blue a lot. There it was again. I crouched to adjust the hem where it had folded under. Lucy, look at me. She did. You don't have to look like them for them to like you. I know. And you don't have to bring presents. I know. And if you want to eat all the lemon bars in the car and tell Grandma we dropped them, I will support that decision. That finally got a real laugh. No, you won't. No, I won't. I worked too hard on the crust. She picked up the container of bracelets, then glanced toward the lemon bars. Grandma's going to be happy I'm coming, right? The question landed more heavily than it should have. I could have answered carefully. I could have said I hoped so. I could have told her that another person's mood was not her responsibility. Instead, I gave her the answer I thought a child deserved to hear. Of course she is. Lucy's shoulders loosened. On the drive across town, late summer heat shimmered above the pavement. Cornfields at the edge of the suburbs had begun to yellow at the tips, but the sky was hard blue and cloudless. Lucy kept the bracelets in her lap like something fragile. Twice, she asked whether we would arrive before the lawn games started. My mother's house was already loud when we pulled up. Cars filled the driveway and spilled onto the curb. I could smell charcoal before I opened my door. Claire's SUV was near the garage. Nathan stood beside it looking down at his phone. When he saw us, he slid the phone into his pocket so quickly, I noticed it, though I had no reason to care. Lucy jumped out with the bracelets. "Wait for the lemon bars," I called. She came back immediately. Of course she did. We carried everything through the side gate together. My mother was near the patio table arranging serving bowls. She kissed my cheek, looked at the pan in Lucy's hands, and said, "Those can go in the kitchen, sweetheart." No hug for Lucy, I noticed. Then I dismissed it. Claire crossed the yard toward us. Her smile looked assembled instead of felt. She touched my arm and asked whether traffic had been bad. Nathan stayed by the grill, even though there was nothing on it yet. Beyond them, the kids were gathering around a painted wooden lawn game near the fence. Someone shouted. Another child ran past with a water balloon. Lucy's whole face changed. Hope can do that to a child. It can make her forget every room where she has stood at the edge. She handed me the lemon bars and hugged the bracelets to her chest. "I'm going to give these out before they start the game." "Go ahead." She ran across the grass toward her cousins, blue dress flashing in the sun. I watched her go with powdered sugar on my fingers, and absolutely no idea that before lunch was served, my daughter would learn there was a rule in my family: she could never work hard enough to satisfy. Lucy crossed the yard with the kind of confidence she only borrowed in short bursts. I watched her stop beside Nolan and two of the older cousins at the wooden lawn game. The bracelets were stacked around her wrist, so she could hand them out one at a time. She said something I could not hear over the music and the scrape of patio chairs. Nolan glanced at the bracelet she held toward him, then at Ava. Ava looked past Lucy toward the house. The game broke apart without anyone announcing that it was breaking apart. One child went for a drink. Another wandered toward the swing set. Nolan carried the beanbags to the far side of the yard, as if that had always been the plan. Lucy stood for a second with the paper bracelet still pinched between her fingers. Then she smiled and followed them. At first I reached for the harmless explanation. Kids got distracted. Groups shifted. Every awkward moment was not a verdict on a child's worth. I put the lemon bars on the patio table. When I looked back, Lucy was beside the swing set. Ava and Emma were sitting on the low retaining wall, with Claire's 6-year-old and one of my cousin's boys. Lucy approached them with 2 bracelets. Emma looked at one, whispered something to Ava, and all 4 children got up almost at once. They did not run away. That would have been easier to understand. They simply moved. They crossed to the patio, where the adults were setting out plates, and left Lucy standing beside the wall with her hand half raised. She came back to me a minute later. "Maybe they didn't hear me," she said. It was the sentence from the beginning of the story, but standing there in the heat, I heard what I had missed the first time. She was not asking me whether they had heard. She was offering an excuse on their behalf before I could decide they had rejected her. I touched her shoulder. "What did you ask them?" if they wanted their bracelets. Did they answer? She shook her head, still smiling. Before I could say anything else, Mom called from the folding table that she needed help with the plastic cups. Lucy turned immediately. I can do it. Of course she could. She carried sleeves of cups to the drink station, separated the stuck ones, and arranged them in 2 neat rows. My aunt thanked her without looking up. Another relative handed Lucy a package of napkins and told her to put them near the forks. Lucy did it with the concentration of someone who had been given an assignment she intended to pass. The cousins were laughing behind her. Every few seconds her eyes went toward them. By the time the first burgers hit the grill, I had watched the same pattern 3 times. Lucy approached. The children found a reason to be somewhere else. She redirected herself into helping an adult so nobody would have to watch her stand alone. Once could have been coincidence. Twice could have been children being thoughtless. By the 3rd time, I stopped trying to make it innocent. I went to find Claire. She was checking her phone while Nathan spoke quietly, with my mother near the garage. Both stopped when I approached. Are the kids doing some kind of game Lucy doesn't know about? Claire glanced toward the yard. They're kids, Lauren. They get weird in groups. Lucy was standing beside the cooler while Nolan and Ava tossed a foam football 20 feet away. This isn't random. Claire's mouth tightened. A younger child ran up asking for juice, and Claire bent to help him, using busyness to end a question she had not answered. I crossed the lawn myself. Nolan saw me coming and looked down. Ava busied herself with the football. Emma started pulling grass from the edge of the fence. I kept my voice calm because I was speaking to children. Hey guys, did Lucy do something? 3 heads shook. Did she say something mean? Another round of head shakes. Then why do you keep leaving when she comes over? No one answered. The youngest boy looked toward the patio. I followed his eyes. My mother was watching us. That was the moment the temperature of the afternoon seemed to change. I looked back at the children. You're not in trouble. I just want to know. Nolan rubbed one sneaker over the other. We're supposed to play together. With Lucy? He shook his head. With who? Ava answered before he could. The real cousins. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? Ava immediately looked frightened, as if she knew she had chosen the wrong phrase. Nolan stepped in. Grandma said kids with their biological parents should play together. The yard did not go silent. That would have been too theatrical. Someone near the grill laughed. Ice rattled in a cup. A dog barked from the neighboring yard. The ordinary sounds kept going while something inside me became very still. I asked, Grandma said that? Nolan nodded. She said not to be mean. Just that kids with their biological parents should stick together because that's natural. Ava added quickly. She said Lucy has you. There it was. A complete little system, delivered in the voices of children too young to understand what they had been recruited to enforce. I turned toward my mother. She was no longer pretending not to watch. I walked back across the grass slowly enough that Lucy, who had been carrying napkins to the table, noticed my face and stopped. Mom picked up a serving spoon. Lauren, did you tell the kids that children with their biological parents should play together? Claire moved before my mother answered. Not here. I looked at her. This happened here. My mother set down the spoon. I told them not to exclude anyone cruelly. It was such a precise sentence that for one absurd second, I almost admired it. That is not what I asked. Mom's face hardened. Several adults nearby had stopped pretending not to listen. My aunt stared into the salad bowl. Nathan stood by the grill with his arms folded. I asked again, Did you tell them Lucy should not play with them because she isn't with her biological parents? Mom took a breath. I said biological kids stick together naturally. Lucy was close enough to hear. I saw her fingers close around the packet of napkins. I said, She is their cousin. She is your daughter. The distinction landed before Mom seemed to realize how clearly she had made it. She is my daughter, I said, which makes her their cousin. Mom's jaw moved once. No one is disputing your adoption. Then what are we disputing? That you keep forcing a relationship the other children don't have naturally. I could have argued about attachment, family language, or how children learn belonging from adults. But Lucy was 3 feet away. I would not turn her existence into a debate while she listened. So this was your rule, I said, not theirs. Mom looked toward the children, then back at me. I gave them permission to enjoy the relationships they already have. No, you gave them instructions about who counts. Lauren, stop. That came from Claire. I turned. Her face was pale beneath the makeup. Not angry pale, drained. Nathan said her name quietly, but Claire ignored him. I said, "Why are you so upset about this?" "Because you're making a scene. My 8-year-old has spent 40 minutes trying to figure out why every cousin walks away when she gets near them. She's fine." Lucy flinched at that, so slightly I might have missed it if I had not spent years learning her smallest movements. I stepped between her and Claire. "No, she is trying to act fine." Mom picked up the serving spoon again, as if returning to lunch could restore order. "This is exactly why I wanted boundaries." I looked at her. "What boundaries?" Her answer came with the certainty of someone who had rehearsed it before today. "From now on, cousin days and the children's family activities should stay for the biological grandkids. You can bring Lucy to adult family dinners if you want, but these children have their own bond. Biological kids stick together. You need to stop forcing your daughter into every space." For 1 second, nobody moved. That was the ban. Not a misunderstanding, not an outdated phrase I could explain away later. My mother had built a category, put my daughter outside it, and told me the category would continue. I heard myself say, "You're banning her from family activities." Mom's expression sharpened. "I am setting a reasonable boundary." "For that year old?" "For everybody." She made them bracelets. My mother looked at the paper loops in Lucy's hands, and something passed over her face so quickly I could not name it. Not softness, not even guilt. Recognition, maybe. Then it was gone. Claire stepped forward. "She shouldn't have come. She's ruining the party." The words hit harder because she did not shout them. She sounded exhausted, as if Lucy's presence itself had created a problem Claire had been trying all week to keep contained. Nathan turned toward her so fast that I noticed. "Claire." She glanced at him. I looked from one of them to the other. "This has nothing to do with where Lucy came from." Nathan's face changed. It lasted less than a second. His eyes snapped to my mother, then back to me. "No one said it did." He answered too quickly. At the time, I heard only defensiveness. Later, I would remember the speed of it. Lucy tugged at the side of my shirt. I looked down. Her chin was lifted in the careful way she used when she was fighting tears, without wanting anyone to know. "I can be quieter," she whispered. That ended it. Not my mother's rule, not Claire's sentence, that. Because Lucy had taken an adult decision designed to exclude her, and translated it into the only language her history had taught her. I can make myself easier to keep. I bent and put both arms around her. Her body was stiff for 1 second before it folded into mine. Behind us, nobody spoke. Not my aunt, not the cousin whose children had been told to avoid Lucy, not the uncle who had once called himself the fun one when we were kids, not Claire, not Nathan. Nobody said my mother had gone too far. Nobody told Lucy she belonged. The silence told me this was not one ugly comment. Every adult there had been given a choice between discomfort and a child, and everyone had chosen comfort. I stood up with Lucy still against my side. My mother said, "Lauren, don't be dramatic. We can discuss this later." I looked at her. For years, later, had been where every problem went to become permanent. I finally understood that. "Understood," I said. Mom blinked. I did not explain. I did not threaten her. I did not tell everyone what terrible people they were. I did not make a speech about DNA or adoption or what family should mean. I took the bracelets from Lucy so she could hold my hand. We walked to the patio table. I picked up her blue backpack. The lemon bars were still untouched in my mother's old metal pan. Lucy looked at them. Should we take those? There was something devastating about the question. She still did not want to be rude. Yes. I carried the pan out. No one stopped us. Claire followed me to the side gate. Don't turn one stupid afternoon into a permanent family war. I looked at Lucy waiting beside my car, backpack hugged to her stomach. This wasn't one afternoon. You know, Mom, she says things badly. She said this very clearly. Claire's face tightened. Then something beneath the anger looked almost like fear. Just leave it alone tonight. The wording caught me. Not let Mom cool down. Not we'll talk tomorrow. Leave it alone tonight. Lucy called my name from the car. I'm taking my daughter home, I said, and left. The first 5 minutes of the drive were silent. Lucy sat in the back with the blue backpack beside her and the container of bracelets on her lap. She did not cry. She peeled at a strip of tape on one bracelet until it lifted from the paper. I wanted to tell her everything at once, that Grandma was wrong, that the cousins were wrong, that she had not failed, that biology was not a ranking system. But I had learned something about comforting Lucy. Too many words could sound like panic. When adults rushed to tell her everything was fine, she assumed something very bad had happened. So I kept my voice steady. You didn't do anything wrong today. I know. It was automatic. I checked her in the mirror. She was looking out the window. After another mile, she said, Did they not like the bracelets? The bracelets were lovely. Maybe paper ones are babyish. No. She nodded. I let another minute pass. What Grandma said was wrong. Lucy traced the edge of the plastic container. She said it was natural. I know. Natural means it just happens. Sometimes adults use that word when they want something to sound like nobody made a choice. She looked up at me in the mirror. That was as far as I wanted to go. She was 8. She did not need a lecture. She needed one clear truth. Grandma made a choice, I said. You didn't cause it. Lucy leaned back against the seat. The bracelet stayed in her lap all the way home. Inside the house, she put the container on the kitchen table and changed out of the blue dress without being asked. 10 minutes later, I found the dress folded on the end of her bed. Lucy did not usually fold clothes. She dropped pajamas on the floor. She left socks everywhere. I had celebrated those habits because they meant she felt safe enough to be inconvenient. Seeing that dress folded neatly brought back the first weeks after she moved in. She was making herself small again. I sat on the edge of the bed. Movie? She shrugged. Pancakes for dinner? A tiny pause. Can I help? You can if you want. You don't have to earn pancakes. That almost made her smile. We made them badly. I burned the first one, because my phone kept buzzing on the counter. Mom called twice. Claire sent 3 texts. Mom, we need to talk when you're calmer. Claire, please don't drag Lucy into this. Then, 10 minutes later, Claire, Mom handled it badly. That doesn't mean you cut everybody off. I turned my phone face down. Lucy mixed blueberries into the batter. We ate at the kitchen table, with the blue backpack under her chair. She did not mention the barbecue until I was rinsing the plates. Would Grandma still talk to you if you hadn't adopted me? I turned off the water. Lucy was standing behind me with one hand on the back of a chair. Yes, it was the truth, and it was the wrong answer by itself. Her eyes dropped. I dried my hands and crouched in front of her. Listen to me. If someone makes me choose between having them in my life and keeping you safe, that is not you taking something from me. That is them making a choice. She swallowed. But would you still have your family? There it was, the deeper wound. Not does Grandma love me? Did you lose something because you picked me? I took her hands. You are my family. She looked unconvinced in the way. Only a child can look unconvinced while wanting desperately to believe you. Did you lose them because you picked me? I don't know yet what I lost, I said. But I know what I chose. Her fingers tightened around mine. You. The word came out quieter than I intended. I chose you when the adoption became possible. I chose you today when we left. I will keep choosing what protects you. Those are my decisions. You do not owe me for them. Lucy stared at our hands for a long time. Then she asked, "Can I throw the bracelets away?" I wanted to say yes immediately. Instead I said, "They're yours." She carried the container to the trash, stood there, and changed her mind. She put it in a kitchen drawer. I did not ask why. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room and listened to my phone vibrate itself tired. Family messages multiplied. My aunt blamed Mom's generation. A cousin said the kids probably misunderstood. Another relative insisted everybody loved Lucy and begged me not to make one awkward moment bigger than it needed to be. Not one message said, I should have spoken up. They wanted peace restored without changing the rule that had broken it. I stopped answering. A little after 11, Claire called. I let it ring out. Nathan did not call at all. For reasons I could not explain, that bothered me more. I replayed the afternoon in pieces. Claire's pale face. Nathan looking at my mother, when I said Lucy's background had nothing to do with this. Mom's careful wording about categories and natural bonds. Claire telling me to leave it alone tonight. I still believed the conflict was about Lucy's adoption. I just no longer believed it was simple prejudice. There had been too much tension around an 8-year-old child who had done nothing but show up with bracelets. I did not know what the missing piece was. I only knew there was one. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. Lucy was still asleep. I arranged for her to spend the morning with the sitter she had known for over a year, then drove to work with coffee. I barely touched. I had already decided I would not answer family calls for a few days. I needed the distance to think clearly. My office occupied one side of a claims integrity suite in a larger commercial insurance building. Most mornings were aggressively ordinary. Badge at the elevator, fluorescent lights, somebody complaining about the printer, calendars full of interviews and review meetings that meant nothing to anyone outside our department. That morning, the shared calendar showed an outside SIU cooperation meeting in a conference room down the hall. Just a file number. No company name, no party names. It belonged to another reviewer, so I had no reason to open anything behind it. I was halfway through my first email when the receptionist appeared at the glass door with 2 visitors. Claire walked in first. Nathan was beside her. I stared at them, still thinking the worst thing that had happened between us was yesterday's barbecue. Claire stopped so abruptly that Nathan nearly walked into her. For 1 second, nobody said anything. The receptionist still had one hand lifted toward the conference rooms. A printer hummed somewhere behind me. Someone farther down the suite laughed at something on a phone call. Then Claire's face emptied. No, she can't be here. She did not say it loudly at first. The words came out like air leaving a punctured tire. Then she looked at Nathan, looked back at me, and her voice jumped. She can't be here. Every head in the immediate area turned. I stood from my desk. Why? Nathan recovered before she did. Claire. He said her name with warning packed into one syllable. She ignored him. This is about Allison Reed. My body understood the name before my mind caught up. Allison Reed, Lucy's birth mother. I had said that name at my kitchen table during the adoption process. I had watched my mother's hand stop halfway to her coffee. I had filed the reaction away as odd and meaningless. Now, my younger sister was standing inside my claims integrity department, pale enough to look sick, saying Allison's name as if I had walked into a room where I was never supposed to be. I looked at Nathan, then at the conference room corridor, then back at Claire. What is about Allison Reed? Nathan stepped between us, not aggressively, but deliberately enough that the movement answered a question I had not asked yet. "We're here for a business meeting." I gathered that. "Lauren," he said, "this has nothing to do with you." Yesterday, he had answered too quickly when I said the barbecue had nothing to do with where Lucy came from. Now my team lead had come out of her office by then. She looked from me to the visitors and read the situation faster than any of us wanted her to. "Lauren?" I did not take my eyes off Claire. "That is my sister and her husband." My team lead waited. I added, "Allison Reed is my daughter's biological mother." The sentence changed the room. No one gasped. No one needed to. In claims work, conflicts do not become less serious because everyone behaves professionally around them. My team lead turned to the receptionist. "Please take Mr. and Mrs. Mercer to conference 3. Mercer. The name landed after Allison's. My sister's married name. Nathan's company name. A name that had existed in one part of my life for 7 years and had never once touched Allison Reed in my mind. Until that moment. Claire did not move. Nathan touched her elbow. "Come on." She stared at me as if she had one more thing she wanted to say, and no safe version of it. My team lead looked at me next. "My office, now." I went. I could hear Claire's heels start again behind me as the receptionist led them away. The door closed. My team lead did not ask for gossip. She asked only what she needed. I explained that Claire was my younger sister. Nathan was my brother-in-law. Allison Reed was the deceased biological mother of my adopted daughter, and I had not known Mercer Fleet had any connection to Allison before Claire said her name in the hallway. "Did you open the meeting file?" "No." "Party names?" "No." Shared calendar showed a file number, and outside. "SIU meeting. It belongs to another reviewer. Any claim documents?" "No." She nodded once. That was the cleanest part of the morning. Within minutes, access on the matter was restricted from me. Another reviewer and outside SIU counsel remained responsible for the meeting. I was told not to attend, not to open anything related to the file, not to ask coworkers for updates, and not to use internal systems to satisfy personal curiosity. I agreed before she finished. It was not a heroic decision. It was the obvious one. If Allison's death had anything to do with a matter involving Nathan's company, the worst possible thing I could do for Lucy, for myself, for anyone who might ever need the truth, was contaminate the line between what I knew as a mother and what I could access as an employee. Still, agreeing did not make the loss of access feel neutral. 10 minutes earlier, I had not known there was a door. Now I knew there was one. Knew my family had been standing on the other side of it, and had just agreed never to touch the handle. My team lead offered to move me to another floor for the morning. I told her I could work from an empty office on the opposite side of the suite until the visitors left. She studied me for a second. "You sure?" "Yes." I was not sure. But I also refused to let Claire's panic turn my workplace into another place where I had to disappear for everyone else's comfort. So I carried my laptop to the small training office near the back stairwell and tried to answer ordinary emails while my pulse refused to become ordinary. I made it through one message about a vendor audit. I reread the same paragraph in another 3 times. Finally, I closed the email and put both hands flat on the desk. Allison Reed had worked for Nathan. That was the only fact Claire had actually given me. Everything else in my head was inference. I forced myself to separate the two. Fact: Claire and Nathan had arrived for an outside SIU cooperation meeting. Fact: Claire believed the matter was about Allison Reed. Fact: Claire knew Allison was Lucy's birth mother before I knew Allison had any connection to Mercer Fleet. Fact: Nathan wanted the conversation stopped. Unknown: why the historical matter was being discussed now. Unknown: what Allison's relationship with Mercer Fleet had been. Unknown: why my mother recognized Allison's name during the adoption process. Unknown: Why Claire had told me the night before to leave things alone tonight. I wrote none of that down. I did not need a secret investigator notebook to remember the moment my family changed shape in front of me. A little before 11, my phone lit with a message from the sitter. Lucy had eaten cereal, complained that the orange juice had too much pulp, and was drawing at the kitchen table. There was a photo attached. Only her hand and the corner of her sketchbook were visible. My breathing finally slowed. I typed back, "Thank you. Tell her I'll be home after lunch." I had just put my phone down when someone knocked lightly on the training room door. Claire. She stepped inside before I answered and closed the door behind her. I stayed seated. "You're not supposed to be talking to me about the meeting." "I'm not." That sentence usually means someone is about to. Her mouth tightened. For a second, we were sisters again in the oldest possible way. Two women standing in a room with years of shorthand between them, and no agreement about what any of it meant. Then I remembered Lucy saying, "I can be quieter." Whatever softness had tried to return disappeared. "How long have you known who Allison Reed was?" Claire looked toward the door. "Lauren." "How long?" She folded her arms. "Since the adoption. Not since yesterday, not since this morning. Since the adoption." The words settled slowly. "Mom told you." Claire's silence answered before she did. "Yes." "And Nathan?" "I told him." I looked at her. She rushed to fill the space. "It wasn't like that." I almost laughed. "You have no idea what like that means to me yet." Allison worked for Nathan. There it was. The second hard fact. How long? "A few years." "Doing what?" "Operations. Scheduling, I think. Sometimes she drove local work when they were short." Claire spoke carefully, like someone trying to cross ice she did not trust. "She and Nathan did not get along." "Why?" She was difficult. I felt something cold move through me. Not because the word proved anything, because it was so ordinary. Difficult. A word you could place over a person and stop looking underneath. "What does that mean?" Claire exhaled. "It means she argued with supervisors. She challenged decisions. She threatened complaints. She was angry a lot." "According to who?" "According to records. According to people who were there." "According to Nathan?" Claire stared at me. "You're doing it already." "Doing what?" "Turning this into something else." I stood then. "Yesterday you told my 8-year-old she was ruining a party. Today you walked into my office for a meeting about her dead mother and screamed because you saw me. Do not ask me to pretend those things live in separate universes just because that would be easier for you." Claire's face flinched. It was the first visible crack in her certainty. But she did not apologize. Instead, she lowered her voice. "Allison died in a company vehicle accident. It was investigated. There was a claim. There were lawyers. There were people saying things about Nathan and the company. It almost wrecked the business." My stomach tightened. Lucy had known her mother died in a crash. I had known that much from the child welfare history. I had known Allison had been working at the time. I had never known where. I had never known the employer was my brother-in-law. "You knew that when you stood in Mom's yard yesterday." "Yes." "And you said nothing." Claire looked away. "Because it was closed." "Closed to who?" "To everyone." "That is not an answer." "It was years ago. It was investigated. Nothing came of the accusations." "What accusations?" She pressed her lips together. "There. A boundary. Not mine. Hers. Claire, I'm not discussing Nathan's business with you. You just discussed Allison's character. That is different." "No, it is convenient." Her face hardened. "See, this is exactly why Mom didn't tell you. My mother's name hit me almost harder than Allison's had." "Why didn't Mom tell me?" "Because she knew what you would do." I took one step closer. What did she think I would do? Make it personal. For a moment I genuinely could not speak. My daughter's mother died. I know. And my mother recognized her name while I was adopting that woman's child. I know. And instead of telling me our family had any connection to her, she decided I would make it too personal. Claire rubbed her forehead. She thought you were finally giving Lucy stability. She didn't want old business drama dragged into the adoption. The explanation was plausible enough to be dangerous. That was the part that stopped me. If Claire had offered me something ridiculous, I could have rejected it cleanly, but I could imagine my mother thinking exactly that way. Diane believed information was a tool. Useful facts were shared. Dangerous facts were delayed until she decided everyone could handle them. She called it protecting people. Maybe she had learned Allison's name through Nathan years earlier. Maybe she had decided that telling me would create questions around a dead woman, a closed claim, and a little girl whose life had already been unstable enough. Ugly, controlling, but not necessarily a cover-up. The possibility made me angrier, not calmer, because it meant I could not yet tell whether I was looking at cruelty, cowardice, or something worse. What was the meeting about today? Claire shook her head. I can't tell you. Can't or won't? Both. Why is an outside SIU looking at something from years ago? I said I can't tell you. Nathan appeared in the doorway behind her. He had not knocked. His expression stayed composed, but the muscle in his jaw did not. Claire, we're leaving. She turned. He looked at me. This is exactly why the insurer screened you out. I screened myself out. Good. Keep it that way. I held his gaze. I intend to. Something in his posture loosened. Too soon, I added. That does not mean I am going to stop asking my family why they knew Lucy's mother and hid it from me. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Nathan's expression went flat. Allison's accident was investigated. That is what Claire says. It was. And that explains why my mother knew her? His eyes shifted toward Claire. A tiny movement. Enough to tell me he did not want to be the one answering. Ask Diane, he said. Then he walked away. Claire stayed another second. I'm serious, Lauren. Do not make Lucy live through all this because you're angry about yesterday. I stared at her. You are the one who connected yesterday to Allison the second you walked through that door. She looked as if I had slapped the air out of her. Then she followed her husband. I stood alone in the training room until the outer door of the suite closed behind them. By noon, I had asked to work from home for the rest of the day. Not because I wanted to chase the Mercer file. Because I needed to be somewhere. My family had not just exploded into my professional life. On the drive home, Claire's version kept rearranging itself in my mind. Allison worked for Nathan. Allison had workplace conflicts. She died in a company vehicle. There had been a claim and accusations. The matter had been investigated. My mother had known enough to recognize her name. Claire had known since the adoption. Nathan had known too. None of those facts proved anyone had caused Allison's death. None proved my mother's behavior toward Lucy came from anything more than shame, fear, or prejudice. But one thing had changed beyond repair. I no longer believed my mother's reaction to the name Allison Reed had been accidental. When I got home, Lucy was at the table with the sitter, coloring a row of houses. She had drawn smoke from every chimney, even though it was August. She looked up. You're home early. I am. Are you sick? No. She accepted that answer and went back to her drawing. I did not tell her what had happened at the office. Not yet. I had spent enough of the last 24 hours watching adults turn their fear into something an 8-year-old had to carry. I would not hand her a mystery just because I was desperate to solve it. After the sitter left, Lucy asked if she could watch a movie. I said yes. She settled on the couch with a blanket, and I went upstairs to the closet where I kept the paperwork from her foster placement and adoption. I did not contact anyone at work. I did not open an insurer system. I did not ask a colleague what Mercer Fleet was being reviewed for. I pulled down the gray document box that had been in my house long before Allison Reed meant anything more to me than the name of Lucy's first mother. Inside were copies I had been given while I was still Lucy's foster caregiver, and later her prospective adoptive parent, placement summaries, permanency meeting notes, medical information, school records, approved disclosures, forms I had signed, and forgotten the moment I signed them. I carried the box to my bedroom floor. For almost an hour, nothing changed. That was important. Real life does not always reward suspicion with a highlighted sentence on page 1. Most of what I found was exactly what I remembered. Placement dates, caseworker notes, a list of routines that had mattered when Lucy first arrived. A summary of family search efforts that I had read once, with the broad understanding that no relative placement had worked out. Then I found a permanency meeting summary from before Lucy came to me. I had seen it before. At the time, the page had meant one thing: no stable family placement. Now a single line looked different. Maternal relative resource Monica Reed withdrawn. I read it twice, then a third time. Withdrawn. Not denied. Not unsuitable. Not unable to locate. Withdrawn. I sat back against the side of my bed. I remembered telling my mother, at that kitchen table during the adoption process, that I only knew there had been no successful kinship placement. That was true. But I had turned no successful placement into a conclusion the paper itself had never made. Nobody wanted Lucy. The document did not say that. It said Monica Reed had been a resource, and then she had withdrawn. I searched the rest of the paperwork more slowly. In an older family contact summary, Monica was identified as Allison's sister. There was an old mailing city, a phone number that might or might not still work, and a note that contact had been attempted during the kinship process. I stared at the surname, Reed. Of course, a name that had been sitting in my house while I taught Lucy she never had to pack quickly again. I could hear the movie downstairs. Lucy laughed once at something on the television. I opened my phone. I did not call. A call from a stranger announcing herself as the adoptive mother of your dead sister's child felt like an ambush. I searched the number first. It was no longer publicly listed, but the same number appeared under an old account attached to Monica's name. A social profile with sparse recent activity matched the city in the paperwork. I sat there for several minutes before typing. I'm Lucy's mother now. I'm not asking you for anything except the truth about why the kinship placement stopped. I read the message 4 times. Then I sent it. For a while, nothing happened. I put the phone face down on the carpet and forced myself to breathe. A minute later, it buzzed. I grabbed it. No reply. Only one word beneath the message. Seen. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The screen stayed empty. Downstairs, Lucy called. Mom, you missed the funny part. I looked at Monica Reed's name glowing on my phone. Then I locked the screen and went back to my daughter. Monica had seen me. She just wasn't ready to answer. For the rest of that afternoon, Monica's silence sat beside me like another person in the house. I did not send a second message or call the old number. Pressure could turn uncertainty into resistance, and I had no right to demand that a woman connected to Lucy's first life answer me on my schedule. That evening, Lucy asked what we were doing after school the next day. Home, I said. Just home? Yes. Her shoulders dropped a little. Relief. Before the barbecue, she had measured family life by what she might be invited to next. Now, she wanted to know whether we were staying home. I hated my mother for making home feel safer by making family feel dangerous. The next morning, after I dropped Lucy at school, I sat in my car in the parking lot with both hands on the steering wheel and made myself define what I was actually trying to find out. Not whether I disliked Nathan. Not whether Claire had lied by omission. Not whether my mother had behaved cruelly. Those questions were already answered. The question was whether there was any legitimate reason for 3 adults in my family to know Lucy's birth mother had worked for Mercer Fleet, keep that connection from me, and react with visible panic when an old matter involving Allison Reed crossed into my workplace. There were ways to test that. Without touching anything I was barred from seeing. I started with what anyone could find. The April 2023 crash summary was spare. A Mercer fleet vehicle, wet pavement, loss of control near an intersection, Allison Reed dead, third-party damage, and later administrative review. Nothing public said cover-up, maintenance fraud, or ignored warnings. If anything, the first layer favored Claire's version. An archived report emphasized speed, road conditions, and driver response. A company statement expressed sympathy and promised cooperation. Public motor carrier records showed an ordinary mix of inspections, violations, repairs, and clean periods, rather than a neat trail leading to Allison. The fragments that did mention her were equally uncomfortable. An old employment dispute had closed without a public finding. A crash-related summary referenced workplace performance concerns. Another filing mentioned a disciplinary warning for refusing dispatch direction. That phrase could describe a worker resisting something unsafe, or a worker refusing to do her job. I had to allow both. Wanting Allison to have been wronged did not give me permission to fill every blank with the version I needed. By noon, I had less certainty than when I started. Allison had argued with supervisors, received discipline, threatened some kind of complaint, and died while operating a Mercer vehicle. Nothing I could lawfully see proved Nathan had caused her death or hidden a defect. Claire's story had not collapsed under contact with facts. For the moment, it had become more plausible. I shut my laptop. For several minutes I sat at my kitchen table listening to the refrigerator cycle on and off. Anger had given every omission the shape of guilt. But omission could also come from shame, fear, or a mother who believed she had the right to decide which truths would upset which daughter. None of that excused the barbecue. It could, however, explain why old history had been hidden without requiring a conspiracy around Allison's death. For the first time since Claire screamed in my office, I wondered whether I was connecting two ugly things simply because they had happened close together. My phone rang. "Claire." I almost let it go. Then I answered. "I'm outside." I stood and went to the front window. Her SUV was at the curb. "Why?" "Because if I text you, you read every word like it's evidence. You screamed my daughter's birth mother's name inside my claims department." "I know. That tends to change how people read your texts." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not coming in if Lucy's home. She's at school." "I know. I checked the time." That irritated me more than it should have. "Come in." Claire entered carrying no bag, no folder, nothing that could turn the conversation into an easy revelation. She looked different from the woman who had come to the barbecue in pressed linen and gold earrings. Her hair was pulled into a rough knot. There were shadows under her eyes. She sat at the kitchen table and looked at the place where Lucy's bracelets had been stacked the day before. I had moved the container to a drawer. Claire noticed the empty space anyway. "I came because I want this to stop before it becomes the only thing Lucy knows about her mother." The sentence was smart. It was also aimed exactly where she knew I was most vulnerable. "She knows almost nothing about this." "Good. Keep it that way. You don't get to decide what she eventually knows." "No, but neither does your anger." I leaned back in my chair. "Say what you came to say." Claire rubbed her thumb along the edge of the table. Allison was not some perfect whistleblower everyone ignored while Nathan twirled his mustache. She had real problems at work. I found the disciplinary warning. That surprised her. "Public material," I said before she could ask. "So you're already digging." "I'm learning about my daughter's mother without touching your claim file." Claire exhaled. "Same thing to Nathan." "No, it isn't." Claire looked toward the living room, though the house was empty. "Allison fought with a supervisor more than once. She threatened to report the company. She accused people of covering for drivers she didn't like. There were complaints about her temper. Nathan told me they tried moving her duties around because she was constantly challenging dispatch decisions." "You were there?" No. So Nathan told you. Some of it. Some came up after the accident. From who? Lawyers, insurance people. Mom heard things. I heard things. There it was again. Mom heard things. My mother, who had later stared at Allison's name over coffee as if she were trying to remember a stranger. What did Mom hear? Claire's shoulders stiffened. Lauren, this is exactly what I mean. No, it's exactly what I'm asking. She knew the accident had been ugly for us. That's all. For us. Claire closed her eyes for a second. You know what I mean. I'm not sure I do anymore. She pushed her chair back an inch, then stopped herself from standing. The company almost got crushed after Allison died. There were claims, accusations about maintenance and management, lenders asking questions, customers getting nervous. It was the first time Claire had said maintenance. What accusations? I don't know the details. Then why bring it up? Because I want you to understand that the issue was looked at. People asked questions. The company answered them. The matter ended. Ended how? I don't know every filing. I was pregnant with our oldest. I had a 6-month-old marriage and a husband who thought the business was going under. I was not sitting in legal meetings taking notes. That detail stopped me for a different reason. It sounded true, not polished truth, human truth. In 2023, Claire had a young child, a new marriage, and a husband convinced the business might fail. I could see how she might have accepted whatever explanation allowed her to keep moving. It did not make her innocent. It made her understandable. She leaned forward. Mom did not tell you who Allison was because she thought you would turn Lucy's adoption into a fight about Nathan. I didn't even know there was a fight about Nathan. Exactly. That is not the defense you think it is. I know how it sounds. Do you? Yes. Her voice cracked for the first time. I know. We sat in silence. Then Claire said, more quietly, Allison was angry before she died. She had threatened action against Mercer. After the accident, some people treated everything she had ever complained about as proof the company caused it. The official account never said that. The old review did not end with Nathan being charged or the company being shut down. There was no magic document proving he sent her out to die. I flinched. Don't talk about her death like an inconvenience your family survived. And don't talk about Nathan like you already know. He killed somebody. I have never said that. Then be honest when the facts don't go where you want. That landed because she was right about one thing. The public material I had found did not vindicate Allison. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I looked at my sister and realized the most dangerous version of a lie was not something false. It was a structure built from true pieces, with the missing pieces kept out of sight. The problem was, I still did not know whether that was what Claire was doing or what I was doing. I need you to leave, I said. She stood. At the door, she stopped. I mean this, Lauren. Don't turn Lucy's first mother into a saint because Mom hurt her feelings. I felt the anger rise, but beneath it was something colder. You keep talking as if those are the only two options. Claire frowned. What? That Allison was difficult or she was right. That Nathan was investigated or nothing was hidden. That Mom wanted stability for Lucy or she knew something she shouldn't. Claire's face changed slightly. Not enough to answer. Enough to tell me she understood the distinction. She left without saying goodbye. That evening, I pulled the gray document box out again. Not because Claire had convinced me, because she had convinced me enough. If I was going to keep asking questions, I needed to be harder on my own assumptions than I was on hers. The line about Monica had already changed once when I looked at it carefully. Maternal relative resource Monica Reed withdrawn. This time, I did not stop at the line. I laid the pre-finalization summaries across my bedroom floor in date order. The first reference to Monica came 11 days after Allison died. A family search note identified her as maternal aunt, and recorded successful contact. A later summary said Monica had expressed interest in being considered. Another note, 2 weeks after that, mentioned preliminary housing concerns, but also said follow-up was planned. Then came a reference to documents requested. Then a school distance question. Then a note about possible childcare arrangements. Small things, boring things. Exactly the kind of things that did not appear when a relative said no at the first phone call. I read every date again. Monica had not been a name someone wrote down and crossed out. She had progressed far enough for people to ask where Lucy might sleep, how far she would be from school, and what Monica would do during work hours. Someone had stepped forward, not successfully, not permanently, but someone had stepped forward. I sat on the floor with the papers around me and thought of Lucy's blue backpack. For years, every adult summary I had received had blurred into one broad conclusion: kinship did not work out. Foster care continued. Permanency eventually shifted. That was how systems compressed a child's life. One sentence could cover 3 months of somebody trying, failing, reconsidering, getting scared, being told no, or walking away. I had filled the blank with the simplest explanation. Nobody could take her. Maybe nobody wanted to. Now, I knew that explanation was not supported by the papers in my own house. The knowledge did not comfort me. It made my stomach ache. Lucy came into the bedroom without knocking, then stopped when she saw the documents. "Are those mine?" "Some old paperwork from when you first came to live with me." She nodded as if that answer made the pages boring. Then she noticed the blue backpack beside the closet. I had moved it there after the barbecue. She picked it up. For a moment I thought she was looking for her sketchbook. Instead, she opened the main zipper and checked inside. Empty except for pencils and a small notebook. She zipped it again. "Are we going to Grandma's this weekend?" The question surprised me because she had spent 2 days not asking. "No." "Okay." No disappointment. Again, relief. She put the backpack down. "Are we staying home?" "Yes." "Okay." She turned to leave. "Lucy." She looked back. "You never have to ask whether you're allowed to stay home." Her forehead wrinkled. "I know." Maybe she did. Maybe her body did not. She went downstairs. I looked at Monica's name on the papers and understood something I had missed earlier. This was not just a question about why an old placement failed. For Lucy, there was a line connecting every adult who had left, every house that had been temporary, every relative who had not become permanent, and every cousin who moved away from her at the barbecue. If Monica had tried, that line changed. Not enough to erase what happened, enough to change the meaning. I waited another day before contacting her again. The social message still showed seen. No reply. I decided not to send another message through the same channel. In the old placement paperwork was a mailing city. A public address search suggested Monica had moved since then, but an old professional listing connected her to a long-term care facility outside Dayton. The facility would not give me personal information, nor did I ask for it. I mailed a short letter to the public business address with my phone number and no details beyond what Monica needed to know. I wrote it by hand. "Monica, I'm not trying to reopen your whole life. Lucy is safe. She is loved. I found your name in paperwork I was given before the adoption. It says you were a maternal relative resource, and then withdrew. I realized I have spent years assuming that meant you did not want her. I do not want to tell Lucy something that may not be true. If you are willing, please tell me only what I am allowed to understand. Lauren Walsh." I almost wrote Lucy's mother underneath my name. Then I crossed it out. The first message had already told Monica who I was. The letter did not need to prove my place. 3 nights later, my phone rang at 8:17. Unknown number. Lucy was at the kitchen table doing math homework and complaining that word problems were just stories with numbers trying to trick you. I answered in the hallway. Hello? Silence. Then a woman said, "Is this Lauren?" My hand tightened around the phone. "Yes." Another pause. "I got your letter." Her voice was lower than I had imagined. Tired. Guarded. "Monica?" "Yes." I stepped into the laundry room and pulled the door almost closed. "Thank you for calling." "Don't thank me yet." I waited. She breathed in slowly. "I saw your message the other day." "I know." I didn't know what to say. "You don't have to explain that." "I do, actually." The words came sharper than before. Then her voice dropped again. "I have spent 3 years trying to figure out which parts I'm ashamed of and which parts I'm angry about." I said nothing. This was not the moment to fill silence. Finally, she asked, "Lucy's okay?" "Yes." "Really?" "Yes." "Happy?" I thought of bracelets in a kitchen drawer, a folded blue dress, the backpack being checked and zipped. "She's loved," I said. "We're working on the rest." Monica made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not hurt so much. "That sounds like her mother." The sentence hit me unexpectedly. I leaned against the dryer. "You knew Allison well?" "She was my sister." "Of course she did." But hearing it made Allison stop being a name in records and become someone's sister, a person who had existed before files and claims. "I'm not calling about the accident," Monica said. "I didn't ask you to." "Not yet. There was warning in it." I accepted that. "I'm calling because of what you wrote. About the placement." I closed my eyes. "Okay." She took a breath. "I didn't disappear." My throat tightened. Monica continued. "I did not hear Allison died and decide Lucy was somebody else's problem. I did not tell the county I wanted nothing to do with her." I looked through the crack in the laundry room door. Lucy was bent over her homework, chewing the end of a pencil. Monica said, "I tried to take her." The room seemed to shrink. All the neat phrases in the paperwork, relative resource, housing follow-up, withdrawn, suddenly had a human voice. "You applied?" "Yes." "You went through the process?" "Enough of it." "Then why did you withdraw?" Silence. Not the uncertain silence from the beginning of the call. A wall. When Monica spoke again, every word was careful. "That is not a phone conversation." I pressed my palm against the dryer. "Monica, I'm not asking you to—" "I know what you're asking." Her breathing had changed. "Bring the paperwork if you still have it." "I do." There's one line in there that makes it sound like I just changed my mind. I looked toward the bedroom upstairs, where the gray box sat open on the floor. "Withdrawn." "Yes." "Did you?" Another pause. Then Monica said, not the way that word makes it sound. My pulse quickened. "Where do you want to meet?" She gave me the name of a small cafe halfway between our towns and a time 2 days later. Before hanging up, she said, "Don't bring Lucy." I wasn't going to. "And Lauren?" "Yes?" "I need you to understand something before you sit across from me." I waited. "I loved my sister. I loved Lucy. And I still made a decision I have hated myself for ever since." The line went quiet, then she ended the call. I stood in the laundry room with the phone against my ear long after the screen went dark. From the kitchen, Lucy called, "Mom, what does 3 times as many mean if they don't tell you why anybody needs that many apples?" I looked at her through the doorway. Someone had tried to take her. That was all I knew. But for the first time since this began, one of the oldest assumptions in Lucy's life had broken open. Monica Reed had not disappeared. She had stepped forward, and something had made her step back. The address Monica gave me was for a diner 40 minutes north of my house. The kind of place built beside an old 2-lane road before the suburbs stretched that far. I got there 10 minutes early and sat in my car with Lucy's gray document box on the passenger seat. For the first time since Claire had screamed Allison Reed's name at my office, I wished I knew less. Knowing nothing had been painful in a clean way, Lucy's birth mother had died. No relative placement had worked out. Lucy had moved through foster care until she reached me. Now every fact seemed to hide another one. Monica had not disappeared. She had tried to take Lucy, and something had made her step back. I carried only the paperwork I had been given before the adoption was finalized. No work files, no insurer documents. Nothing I had learned through a system I was now screened out of. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee and fryer oil. Monica was already in a booth near the back. I recognized her before she stood. Not because she looked exactly like Allison. I had only a handful of photographs of Lucy's birth mother. But Monica had the same narrow chin and the same way of holding her mouth slightly to one side when she was uncertain. She looked at the gray box in my hands, then at me. "Lauren?" I nodded. She did not offer a hug. I was grateful. We sat across from each other with menus. Neither of us opened. Monica kept both hands around a coffee cup. "I almost didn't come," she said. "I almost didn't ask you to." A faint laugh left her, then vanished. "I'm not here to make you prove you loved Allison," I said. "I need to understand what happened after she died." Monica stared into her coffee. "When Allison died, I was not ready for a child." The sentence came without defense. I was getting divorced. I had moved into a one-bedroom apartment that was supposed to be temporary. I was working nights because it paid more. Half my things were in storage. I was behind on bills. She looked at me. "I need you to know that before I tell you anything else. I wasn't some perfect aunt with a spare bedroom waiting." "I understand." When they called after the accident, I kept asking where Lucy was. They answered me, and I kept asking again. Her voice thinned. "There were emergency caregivers, meetings, forms. The first time someone asked whether I wanted Lucy placed with me, I said I didn't know." My chest tightened. "Then I went home," she said, "and realized there was no one else I trusted to answer yes." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded printout. I emailed the worker the next morning. She slid it to me. It was an old email requesting information about becoming Lucy's kinship caregiver. No legal seal, no miracle document, just proof of an action. "I found a 2-bedroom apartment," Monica said. "I asked to change shifts. I called the school district. I checked after school care. I filled out the background paperwork. They came to see where I lived." She gave a small, bitter smile. "The caseworker said my kitchen was clean. I remember being proud of that because I didn't have much else going for me." "You were trying." "Yes." The word was barely audible. "I was trying." She showed me 2 more things, not as evidence of virtue but because she wanted me to understand sequence. One was an old rental application for a 2-bedroom unit with Lucy listed as a prospective household member. The other was a page of handwritten notes from a call with a childcare center. Hours, weekly cost, waitlist date, and a question Monica had underlined twice. "Can kinship subsidy help with after-school care?" None of it proved she could have made the placement work. In fact, parts of it showed how close to the edge she had been. The rent on the apartment would have eaten most of one paycheck. The child care number had a question mark beside it. Her night shift ended after the center opened, which meant she would have needed a neighbor or coworker to cover the gap on school mornings. The system had not been wrong to ask hard questions. But hard questions were not the same thing as no one stepping forward. Monica told me a worker had visited her apartment and asked where Lucy would sleep. Monica had pointed to the only bedroom and said Lucy could have it while she took the couch until she found something larger. She had begun measuring the room because Lucy had owned a small white dresser at Allison's place, and Monica wanted to know whether it would fit. "I even wrote down the width," she said. 32 inches. I still remember that, and forget my own passwords. The detail broke something open in me. Lucy had spent years believing every adult decision around her had been about whether she was worth the trouble. Here was an aunt who had measured a wall. I pulled the permanency summary from my box and turned it toward her. Maternal relative resource Monica Reed withdrawn. That's all I had, I said. For years, I read it as if you decided you didn't want her. Monica's face tightened. There are sentences that make a whole life look simple. What made you withdraw? She stared at the line. Then she asked, how much do you know about your mother and Allison? Almost nothing. She knew Allison. I know that now. No, I mean before Lucy. Before the adoption. Before you were involved. A cold sensation moved through my arms. Did my mother contact you after Allison died? Monica looked down. Then she said the sentence that divided the story cleanly in two. I withdrew after your mother came to see me. Someone at the counter asked for ketchup. A spoon hit a plate. The refrigerator behind the register kicked on. But everything I understood about Diane Walsh shifted. My mother came to your apartment? Yes. How did she know where you lived? Allison had me listed as an emergency contact. The company had my information after the accident. Diane said she was there because Claire and Nathan connected the families and she wanted to help. I thought about my mother at my kitchen table. Allison Reed? She had not been hearing a stranger's name. She had been recognizing a door she thought was closed. What did she say? Monica inhaled. She didn't threaten me. The fact that she began there made my stomach tighten. She came with coffee. She knew about my divorce. She knew I was looking for housing. She knew enough about the claim and the arguments around Allison's death to make everything sound like it could become a legal war. What kind of war? Lawyers. People blaming Allison. Questions about custody, and whether Lucy would be dragged through all of it. Diane kept saying I wasn't stable enough to add that fight to my life. Monica rubbed her palms together. She said Lucy needed a clean break. The blue backpack flashed into my mind. Lucy at 5 asking where I wanted her shoes. Lucy keeping pajamas packed, because it was easier when she had to go. There had been nothing clean about any of it. What did you think she meant? That Lucy could go somewhere without all the fighting attached to Allison. Foster care, Monica winced. She didn't call it that. Of course she didn't. My voice came sharper than I intended. Monica did not defend herself. I signed the withdrawal, Lauren. There it was. She didn't force me. I was already scared. My housing wasn't settled. I was exhausted. My ex was threatening to stop helping with bills we still shared. The caseworker kept asking how I would cover childcare. Then your mother sat in my kitchen and made every fear sound responsible. What exactly did she tell you? That loving Lucy didn't mean I was the best place for her. That if I loved her, maybe I had to let people find her something stable. The cruelty of it was that it contained enough truth to work. Diane had not needed to invent Monica's weakness. She only needed to turn temporary weakness into a permanent conclusion. Did she tell you not to take Lucy? Not in those words. She told me to think carefully before making a grieving child part of a fight I might not win. And you withdrew? 2 days later. I looked at the single word on the page. Withdrawn. Behind it had been a divorce, night shifts, a frightened aunt, and my mother sitting at a kitchen table calling surrender responsibility. Did Diane know Allison wanted you involved? I don't know what Diane knew. That answer mattered, because it was not useful enough to be invented. Monica's eyes filled. I'm not making her responsible for every bad decision I made. I could have called the caseworker back. I could have asked for more time. I didn't. I told myself Lucy would end up somewhere better. She did eventually. Pain and gratitude crossed Monica's face together. That doesn't make what happened before okay, I said. No, and it doesn't mean you get to come back now, as if nothing happened. I know, but it changes one thing. What? I looked at her. Lucy was wanted. Monica pressed both palms to the table. Yes, her voice cracked. Yes, she was. I drove home with that sentence in my head. Someone had wanted Lucy. It should have felt like good news. Instead, it opened a wound I had never known how to name. Lucy had spent years behaving as if belonging was something adults awarded for good performance. Somewhere in her past, a woman had stepped forward and then been persuaded that stepping back was love. I did not know how much to tell an 8-year-old. I knew how much not to tell her. No company claim, no lawyers, no theories about Diane, just the part that belonged to Lucy. She was at the kitchen table that evening, drawing houses. I sat across from her and asked whether I could tell her something about her first mother's family. The pencil stopped immediately. I told her I had found Aunt Monica, Allison's sister, and that when Allison died, Monica had tried to have Lucy live with her. She had entered the kinship process, talked to the people in charge, and looked for a home that could work for both of them. I had imagined that information might bring relief. Instead, I watched hurt arrive, from a direction Lucy had never prepared for. Her pencil rolled against the salt shaker. Then why didn't she keep me? That was the real wound. Not why Grandma had excluded her, but why another adult who had stepped forward had still stepped away. I told her I did not know all of it yet. Monica had been scared, and adults around her had convinced her that leaving might be better for Lucy. I made one point without hesitation. Monica had not stopped wanting her. Lucy listened, then reminded me in the flat, factual way children sometimes do that she had gone to 3 houses afterward. If stepping away was supposed to give her one stable place, that was not what she remembered. I could not argue with that, and I did not try. After a while, she asked whether she could meet Monica someday. I told her yes, if she wanted to, but we did not have to decide now. She nodded, moved the drawing aside, and asked what we were having for dinner. That was how children sometimes carried enormous things. They put them beside the salt shaker and asked about pasta. Later, when I passed her room, the blue backpack was open on the floor beside her bed. She had not packed it, she was simply sitting beside it. I sat down too. After a long silence, she asked, "Did Aunt Monica have a backpack for me?" I had no answer good enough for that question, so I stayed on the floor beside her until she was ready to talk about something else. The next morning, I called my mother. Mom answered on the 4th ring, already framing my distance as punishment. I did not argue about the barbecue. I told her I had met Monica Reed. The silence on the other end was not confusion, and when she finally answered, her first objection was that I had no business contacting Monica. That alone stripped away the last pretense that Allison's family had been unknown to her. I asked why she had gone to Monica's apartment after Allison died. Mom did not deny the visit. Instead, she described Monica exactly as Monica had described herself: divorcing, financially strained, working nights, living in housing that might not pass a kinship review. In Mom's version, the visit had been an act of caution. She had seen a grieving child about to be pulled into another unstable household and had told an overwhelmed aunt not to promise what she could not sustain. She emphasized that professionals were already handling Lucy's placement and insisted that biology did not make Monica automatically capable. The hypocrisy was impossible to miss. 2 days earlier, Mom had invoked biology as a natural law for who belonged with the grandchildren. Now biology became irrelevant when it described an aunt who had actually tried to take Lucy. I told her I was not disputing Monica's vulnerabilities. I was asking why my mother had appointed herself the person who should turn temporary weakness into a permanent conclusion. She admitted telling Monica to think carefully, and admitted using the phrase clean break. She said the fighting around Allison's death, the claims, and the possibility of custody conflict could have swallowed a child already grieving. In her telling, she had not ordered Monica to withdraw. She had simply made sure Monica understood the risks and trusted the placement system to find something steadier. It was the strongest version of her defense, because almost every ingredient was true. Monica had been unstable. She had been scared. Diane had not signed the withdrawal for her. But the sequence mattered. Mom knew the company history, knew Monica was the only relative who had stepped forward, went to her while she was most vulnerable, and presented surrender as the responsible option. 2 days later, Monica withdrew. I told Mom that was not the same as rescuing Lucy from chaos. It was influencing the only family bridge Lucy had before anyone knew where foster care would lead. Mom rejected the word influencing. She said she had offered perspective to a woman who was in over her head. When I reminded her Lucy had later moved through multiple temporary homes, she answered that nobody could have predicted every placement. I agreed. That was precisely why she had not been entitled to present a clean break, as if the alternative future were known. Then I told her the part she had not expected. Lucy now knew someone had wanted her. My mother went quiet. I did not use that silence to accuse her of a crime or demand a confession. I told her only that the story Lucy had inherited was changing, and Mom no longer got to choose which pieces survived because she believed one version was kinder. She said I was making a complicated past sound simple. I told her I was doing the opposite. For years, a single word withdrawn had made Monica's decision look simple. Now I knew there had been fear, effort, a visit from Diane, and a choice Monica still regretted. None of that made Monica blameless, but it meant Lucy's worth had never been the missing ingredient. Mom said she would not keep defending a decision she still believed had been sensible. I told her she did not have to. I was done asking her for permission to understand it. Before hanging up, I asked one last time whether she had known Allison wanted Lucy kept connected to Monica. Mom said she did not know what Allison had wanted. It was not an answer I could prove false, so I left it there. I ended the call. My hands were shaking. Not because I had won. I had not. My mother had admitted enough to confirm Monica's story, and denied enough to leave the real question alive. She had known Allison. She had known Lucy. She had approached Monica. She had argued for a clean break. And when the same child later entered our family through me, Diane had begun drawing lines around who counted as real. That was no longer ignorance. It was history management. That evening, after Lucy went upstairs to brush her teeth, my phone buzzed. Monica. There was no message at first. Only a photograph of an old text thread between her and Allison, dated months before the crash. Most of it was ordinary. A complaint about work. A joke about Lucy refusing peas. Then one message from Allison. If anything ever happens to me, I want Lucy with you. I know your life is messy. Mine is too. But she knows you, and I trust you to keep her connected to me. I read it twice. A second message from Monica appeared. I should have shown you this today. I was ashamed. I sat at the same kitchen table where my mother had once frozen at Allison Reed's name. Diane had called what happened afterward a clean break. Allison had wanted the opposite. She had wanted Lucy connected. And someone in my family had spent years making disconnection sound like protection. I kept Allison's old message open on my phone until the screen dimmed. Keep her connected to me. It was such an ordinary wish for a mother to leave behind that it made everything around it feel less ordinary. Allison had not written about money or a lawsuit or who should be blamed if something happened to her. She had written about continuity, about Lucy knowing where she came from, about one person she trusted enough to keep a child tethered to that history. Diane had called separation a clean break. By then I knew my mother had interfered with Lucy's path after Allison died. What I still did not know was whether that interference had been tied to an ugly family instinct to control information or to something more concrete about Mercer Fleet. And I had one problem I could no longer avoid. Claire's version of Allison was not entirely false. Allison had argued at work. She had refused dispatch instructions. She had threatened complaints. The public record did contain a disciplinary warning. If I wanted the truth, I could not turn those facts into decorations around a conclusion I had already chosen. The next morning, I called Monica. I did not ask her to tell me what caused the crash. I asked a narrower question. Who at Mercer actually saw Allison fight about the things Claire calls performance problems? Monica was quiet for a moment. Then she gave me a name. Frank Delaney. She remembered him because Allison had mentioned him more than once. He worked around the shop and safety side of the company. According to Monica, Allison once described him as the only person there who could tell me I was being a pain in the ass and still check whether I was right. That sounds promising, I said. It sounds like Allison, Monica replied. She did not have a current number. She had an old one in Allison's contacts and a Christmas card Frank had mailed after the accident. The number was dead, but the return address led me to a public listing for a man with the same name outside Newark. I stared at the result for a long time before calling. A man answered on the fifth ring. Yeah? Mr. Delaney? Who's asking? My name is Lauren Walsh. I'm calling about Allison Reed. The line went so quiet, I thought he had hung up. Then he said, No. Not who are you? Not what about her? Just no. I understand. Then we're done. I'm not with Mercer. I'm not calling from an insurer. I'm not asking you to reopen a claim. That bought me 3 more seconds. Who are you? I'm raising Allison's daughter. He swore under his breath. I hated myself for using the connection, even though it was simply true. Before he could end the call, I said, I'm not asking you to do anything for Lucy. I'm not asking you to be a hero. I need one answer for myself. Did Allison complain about safety before she died? Or did people only start attaching her workplace fights to safety after the accident? He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Those complaints were before. My hand tightened around the phone. How long before? I said one answer. You did. And I gave it. He hung up. I stood at my kitchen counter, listening to the deadline. It was almost nothing. It was also the first thing I had learned that Claire's version could not comfortably absorb. Allison's complaints about safety had existed before there was a fatal crash for anyone to reinterpret. I did not call Frank back that day. 2 days later, he called me. He did not apologize for hanging up. He gave me the name of a coffee shop off Route 40 and said he had 20 minutes. I arrived first. Frank came in wearing work boots polished by age rather than care, jeans, and a faded gray shirt with no company logo. He looked to be in his early 60s. His hands were thick across the knuckles, one index finger bent slightly sideways. He did not order coffee. He sat across from me and said, 20 minutes. I won't waste them. You probably will. There was no hostility in it, just fatigue. I told him what I knew, and, more importantly, what I did not. I told him I had seen public references to Allison refusing dispatch direction. I told him I had been screened out of the Mercer matter at work and would not ask him for anything confidential from an insurer file. Frank watched me carefully. Then he said, You work insurance? Yes. That figures. What does? You're trying very hard not to ask the question you want to ask. I almost smiled. What question do you think that is? Did Nathan Mercer kill Allison Reed? My stomach turned. No. Frank lifted an eyebrow. I'm serious. I don't think Nathan sent her out hoping she would die. I need to know whether the story that she was just a difficult employee leaves out why she was difficult. For the first time, Frank looked at me instead of through me. That, he said, is a better question. He leaned back. Mercer Fleet had used an electronic maintenance system even then. Drivers or shop staff could flag defects. Work orders were opened, parts assigned, labor recorded, units placed out of service when necessary. Dispatch could see status. None of that was unusual. The problem, according to Frank, was what happened when trucks were needed faster than the shop could clear them. Sometimes a work order would be administratively closed because someone believed the remaining issue was minor, duplicated, or already handled. Sometimes the physical paperwork caught up later. And sometimes? I asked. Frank rubbed his thumb over the edge of the table. Sometimes a unit looked better in the system than it looked on the shop floor. The sentence was simple enough for anyone to understand. Allison understood it too. She worked scheduling. A truck marked available could be assigned. A truck marked down could not. She began noticing situations where a unit switched to ready status, even though the shop side still showed an unresolved question. At first she asked, Frank said. Then she started keeping screenshots and sending emails. I kept my face still. Screenshots you have? No, he said it sharply. I told you, I don't have a box of evidence waiting in my garage. I left Mercer. I threw out half my old junk. I am not your miracle witness. I didn't ask you to be. Good. He looked toward the window. One truck had a brake complaint, not Allison's crash truck. Earlier, parts were ordered. Before the parts arrived, the status got changed. Allison caught it because dispatch wanted to put the unit back on a local run. What did she do? Refused to assign it. Was that the disciplinary incident? Frank looked at me again. Part of it. The public phrase came back to me. Refusal to follow dispatch direction. Claire had used it as proof Allison was combative. Frank described the same event differently. Allison refused to assign a vehicle because she could not verify that the work the system said was complete had actually been completed. She argued with a supervisor. She copied people on an email. She threatened to report the practice if they kept clearing units on paperwork before the shop was done. She could be loud, Frank said. She could be rude. If you want me to tell you Allison was sweet every minute, I won't. I don't need her sweet. Good. She wasn't. He almost smiled. Then his expression closed again. But she wasn't making that issue up. Something shifted inside me, not because Allison had become a saint, because she had become specific. The word difficult no longer floated by itself. It had a date, an argument, a truck, a work order, a reason. What did you tell investigators after she died? Frank's eyes dropped. I knew immediately I had reached the edge. I talked to people. What did you tell them about her warnings? That there had been concerns. Had been. He looked irritated. That's what I said. Is that what you said first? His jaw tightened. I waited. Frank pushed his chair back slightly. My first statement was stronger. I did not move. How? I said she had raised the same kind of close-out issue before the crash. More than once. I said management knew people were arguing about work orders being closed before the shop trail matched. What happened to that statement? Nothing magical. Nobody burned it in front of me. His voice had gone flat. There were follow-up conversations. Questions about what I personally saw versus what Allison told me. Questions about whether I could prove who changed a status. Questions about whether I wanted to accuse people of fraud, when sometimes paperwork really does lag behind repairs. Those were legitimate questions. That was what made the next part worse. By the final statement, he said, I was more careful. Because the facts changed? No. Because someone pressured you? Frank looked toward the door. 20 minutes is up. Mr. Delaney. He stood. Don't. Was it Nathan? I said don't. Someone from Mercer? He put both hands on the back of the chair. It was people around the company, people around the family. That is all I'm saying. Family. His face hardened as if he regretted the word. I'm done. He walked out before I could ask another question. I stayed at the table. Frank had given me no document. No recording, no name I could hand to anyone. But the shape of the old story had changed again. Allison had not become a safety critic after she died. She had been one before. And the disciplinary incident Claire had offered as evidence of her unreliability was connected to exactly the kind of dispute she had threatened to report. In my car afterward, I reopened the public reference to Allison's disciplinary warning. The wording had not changed since the first time I read it. Refusal to follow dispatch direction, repeated challenge to supervision, escalation beyond assigned authority. 2 days earlier, those phrases had made me stop because they supported Claire's story, Now they still supported it, but they meant something different. Allison had refused. Allison had challenged. Allison had escalated. Frank had not erased any of that. He had supplied the missing object of the verbs, a vehicle whose maintenance status she did not trust. That mattered more to me than finding a sentence that declared her right. People could be abrasive and still be correct about danger. They could violate a supervisor's preferred chain of command because the chain itself was moving a truck before the shop was ready. The facts had not reversed. Their meaning had. For the first time, I understood how a truthful disciplinary record could become part of a false story without a single line being fabricated. That afternoon I called Claire. She did not answer. An hour later she texted, "What now?" I wrote, "I need to understand why the current review pulled Allison's old loss." The typing dots appeared, vanished, then returned. "You know I can't discuss the claim with you," I wrote. "Then don't. Tell me what changed at Mercer this month that has Nathan acting like the past is alive." She called immediately. "You are contacting people." It was not a question. I spoke to someone who knew Allison. Jesus, Lauren. Public contact. Voluntary conversation. Nothing from my job. You think saying the words that way makes this normal? No. I think it makes the boundary clear. Claire breathed hard into the phone. "Who?" "I'm not giving you a name." Her silence told me that answer scared her more than a name might have. Then she said, "You have no idea what you're doing." "Maybe. So tell me why the old file matters now." "I told you the company is being reviewed." "That is not the same thing." She said nothing. I let the quiet do the work. Finally, Claire said, "A truck had a brake problem." My skin prickled. "When?" "The week before Mom's barbecue." She spoke reluctantly now, each sentence sounding like something she wanted back the moment it left her. The truck had been on a delivery run. A brake-related failure led to property damage and a near injury. No one died. That should have made it a current loss problem. Instead, the post-loss documents created another question. "A work order showed complete," Claire said. The reviewer asked for the shop support. There wasn't matching labor and parts documentation. I closed my eyes. Was the repair actually done? Nathan says yes. That isn't what I asked. I don't know. There it was. For the first time, Claire did not give me Nathan's answer as if it were a fact. She continued before I could respond. Outside counsel started asking about how maintenance exceptions get closed. Then they asked for prior similar losses. Then Allison's file came up. Because of the same truck? No. Same defect? Not exactly. Then what was the similarity? Claire's voice dropped. The paperwork. Administrative closure before the physical trail matched. The phrase did not come from my employer. It came from my sister. Time changed shape in that moment. Until then, Allison's death could still be contained in 2023. A terrible event, an old argument, records I could not see, people whose memories had hardened into camps. The current truck changed that. If the same process problem was appearing 3 years later, then the question was no longer only what Mercer Fleet had done around one dead employee. It was whether the culture that made her warnings possible had ever stopped. "Lauren," Claire said, "this is why I wanted you to leave it alone." "No, this is why you wanted me not to know what it was." "You think there's a difference?" "Yes. For Nathan there isn't." The sentence slipped out before she could stop it. I heard her breathe in. Then she said, "Forget I said that." "I won't." "Of course you won't." "Claire, are they asking Mercer to preserve records?" "They're preparing more requests." The answer was enough. The review was moving. Nathan's time to control the narrative was getting shorter. So was Claire's. Before Claire hung up, she told me the newest version of Mom's warning. I was trying to destroy Claire's children's future. The phrasing stopped me because it was not the fear Mom had been giving me. With me, She had kept invoking Lucy. With Claire, she was invoking a marriage, 2 children, and the company supporting them. Claire did not say she believed it. She said she no longer knew what she believed, which was not the same thing. Mom called that evening without a greeting and accused me of contacting Mercer. I corrected her. I had contacted a former employee through a lawful personal path, not touched the insurer matter. She ignored the distinction and changed the argument completely. Monica had been about whether Mom believed she had helped an unstable aunt make a prudent decision. Now she made me the danger. You are making that child live through her mother's death because you need to be right. That was the moral reversal the earlier conversation had only threatened to become. A week before, Mom had helped make Lucy the outsider. Now she wanted me to believe protecting Lucy required leaving the questions buried. I told her Lucy knew nothing about Mercer, but Mom answered that this was only true, not yet. Then I confronted the split directly. She had told Claire I wanted to destroy her children's future while telling me I was damaging mine. She had given each daughter a different child to fear for. Mom denied being calculating, but when I asked what was truly at stake, she finally said it plainly. Allison was dead. Claire had a living husband and 2 children. Nathan's company supported employees with families. Reopening old questions could hurt people who had not caused the original tragedy. The direction of her protection could not have been clearer. It flowed toward Claire, Nathan, and the company, and away from Allison, Monica, and Lucy, whenever their history threatened that arrangement. I did not ask her to confess. I told her to stop using children as reasons adults should not answer questions. She hung up on me. The next morning I sent Frank one message. Thank you for meeting me. I won't contact you again unless you ask me to. If you ever decide you're willing to clarify what changed between your first statement and the final one, I'll listen. He did not answer. 3 days passed. Claire stopped texting. Mom stopped calling. The silence should have felt peaceful. It did not. At work, I stayed completely outside the Mercer matter. I did my own files, attended my own meetings, and avoided even the casual curiosity of coworkers who knew something awkward had happened in the suite. I had no idea what outside counsel had requested or what Mercer had produced. At home, Lucy asked me whether Aunt Monica liked cats. I said I had no idea. She asked whether Allison had liked them. I said I did not know that either. Lots of things you don't know, she said. More every day. She considered that, then nodded, as if ignorance were a normal adult condition. Maybe it was. That night, just after 11, my phone lit on the nightstand. Frank Delaney. For a second, I thought he had called by mistake. It was a text. There's one thing I never put in the final statement. I sat up. A second message arrived. The maintenance dates changed after Allison died. I read Frank's message 3 times before I called him. There's one thing I never put in the final statement. The maintenance dates changed after Allison died. He did not answer. I let the phone ring 6 times, stopped, and stared at the screen until it went dark. 10 minutes later, he called back. You saw it, he said. Yes. A long breath moved through the line. I was standing at my kitchen counter with Lucy's lunchbox open beside me. It was almost 9 at night. She was upstairs reading, and the dishwasher was making a soft, grinding sound. I had been meaning to investigate for 2 weeks. Ordinary life had become strange that way. I could be measuring pretzels into a plastic container, while a man told me that dates connected to my daughter's mother had changed after she died. I kept my voice level. What changed? I'm not doing this over the phone. Then tell me what you are willing to tell me. He was quiet again. Finally, he said he remembered seeing one maintenance status before the crash and a different completion date later, after Allison was dead and the questions had started. He would not say who changed it because he had not watched anyone type anything into a system. He would not call it falsification because he could not prove intent. What he could say was narrower. the version he remembered before the accident did not match the version he later saw, attached to the company's account of what had been completed and when. That distinction mattered. It also frightened me more than a dramatic accusation would have. "Did you tell anyone that?" I asked. "Not in the final statement." "Why?" He did not answer directly. "I told you the first one was stronger." I remembered him saying the wording had become cautious after somebody connected to the company and family leaned on him. "Frank, I'm not asking you to become a hero. I'm asking whether, if a lawyer contacts you, you'll tell them exactly what you just told me. No more than you know. No less." The silence lasted so long I checked the screen to make sure the call had not dropped. Then he said, "You can give them my number." That was not a signed affidavit. It was not a confession. It was not proof that Nathan had ordered a record changed. It was a door Frank had agreed not to close. The next morning I took a personal day. I did not go to my office. I did not log into a work system. I did not call anyone in my department. Instead, I sat at my dining table with the gray box from Lucy's pre-adoption paperwork, printed copies of the public crash materials I had already found, Monica's voluntary messages, the photograph of Allison's old text to her sister, and a handwritten page listing only the things Frank had personally agreed I could pass along. His name, his phone number, and the fact that he was willing to be contacted about prior safety complaints and maintenance record timing. I also wrote one paragraph about myself. Lauren Walsh, claims integrity employee of the current commercial auto insurer. Family relationship to Claire and Nathan Mercer. Adoptive mother of Allison Reed's daughter. Screened from the Mercer matter immediately after the conflict became known. No internal claim material accessed. I put that page on top. If this went anywhere, I wanted the first fact anyone saw to be the reason I could not be treated as a neutral employee inside my own company. The lawyer I met that afternoon did not give me the kind of cinematic certainty people imagine lawyers provide. She did something more useful. She separated what I possessed from what I suspected. The placement records belonged in one stack because they had been provided to me lawfully before Lucy's adoption. Monica's emails and messages belonged in another because Monica had given them voluntarily. Public records stayed public. Frank was not my witness to command. He was a person who had consented to contact. My theories belonged nowhere. For 2 hours, we reduced 3 years of family secrecy into material that could survive outside my anger. I hated how thin it looked. I also understood why that mattered. A real chain did not become stronger because I wanted it to. It became stronger when independent people could test each link. My lawyer asked one question before we finished. "If you send this, you need to assume your family will know the issue has moved beyond you. Are you prepared for that?" I thought of my mother saying I was making Lucy relive her mother's death. I thought of Claire saying I wanted to destroy her children's future. I thought of Nathan's face when he told me to keep my distance from the insurer matter. Then I thought of Allison's message to Monica. "I trust you to keep her connected to me." For years, Lucy had been the one paying for everybody else's preferred version of peace. "Yes," I said. Before I signed the authorization, I called my team lead for one reason only: disclosure. I told her my personal lawyer was preparing to send material I possessed outside work to the independent intake, handling the Mercer review, and possibly to a safety regulator. I told her I had used no company system, no internal claim information, and no coworker source. I did not ask what anyone inside had found. "That wall stays exactly where it is," she said. "I know. If outside counsel wants you as a source, they contact you properly. You do not become an employee. Investigator because you know the people involved." I know. After the call, I held the pen over the authorization line. The distinction sounded dry: employee on one side, mother and lawful source on the other. But it was the only thing keeping my need for answers from becoming another excuse to bend a rule, because the outcome felt important. I signed. Once independent people received the names and material, Closing Lucy's gray box would no longer close the questions. That afternoon, through counsel, I authorized the materials to go where they could be reviewed without me crossing the wall around the Mercer claim. My lawyer sent the lawful source material and conflict disclosure to the outside SIU intake contact handling the insurer side. Separately, the safety information went through the appropriate motor carrier complaint channel so the regulator could decide for itself whether anything warranted review. There was no siren. No one was arrested. My phone did not explode the second the email left. I drove to pick Lucy up from school. That was the point of no return. Not because I knew what anyone would conclude, because for the first time, the truth no longer depended on whether Diane could persuade me to stop asking, whether Claire could make the past sound closed, or whether Nathan could keep every inconvenient fact inside a family conversation. Other people now had permission to ask their own questions. 2 days passed before the first consequence reached me. Claire called while I was folding towels. "What did you do?" There was no greeting. I sat on the edge of my bed. "What happened?" "Nathan got another cooperation request. Council wants records preserved, old and current. They're asking about prior loss representations, maintenance history, people who were interviewed. He says this has gone from a claim review to a fishing expedition." I said nothing for a moment. She heard the answer anyway. "You sent something." "I sent material I lawfully had through my own lawyer. I did not touch your claim file. You sent it to my insurer. Outside counsel handling the review got source material. That is different from me working the file." To Nathan, it is not different. I looked at the towels in my lap. One was Lucy's, bright yellow, with a corner she had stained with blue paint. Your husband's feelings about the distinction are not what determines whether the distinction exists. Claire made an angry sound. Then she lowered her voice. "He's asking me about old papers." That changed the air. "What kind of papers?" "I don't know. Personal copies, old lender packets, insurance packets, things I might have kept because I signed some of them." "Did you?" A pause. "Lauren." I waited. "I'm not having that conversation." I could hear children in the background. One of hers asked for something. Claire covered the phone, answered, then came back sounding even more tired. "Nathan says preservation means nobody throws anything away now. That sounds sensible. Don't, what? Talk like this is a normal compliance process. You know exactly what this could do." "No, I know what people are now allowed to look at. I do not know what they will find." "That is not comforting. It isn't supposed to be." She hung up. For the first time since the barbecue, I did not feel the urge to call back. The consequence had moved away from persuasion. Nathan could no longer solve the problem by convincing me I was emotional. He had to answer people whose job was to ask what had been represented, what had been preserved, and why the same kind of maintenance closeout problem had appeared again. That evening, Monica called. Her voice sounded different, not calmer, resigned. "I need to tell you the part I left out." I went onto the back porch so Lucy would not hear. Late August heat still clung to the boards, even though the sun had dropped. "You don't owe me a confession," I said. "This isn't for you." I waited. Monica told me that after she withdrew from the kinship process, Diane had not simply disappeared. My mother called again. She checked whether Monica had found a cheaper place. She gave her the number of a landlord outside Dayton who had an apartment closer to Monica's job. When Monica said she could not manage the deposit and moving costs, Diane offered to help. "How much?" I asked. "I don't remember every dollar." She covered the moving truck and part of the deposit. "Before or after you withdrew?" "After." The words sat between us. Monica rushed to explain what I already understood. She didn't hand me money and say, "Take this," and abandon Lucy. It wasn't like that. I know. I had already signed the withdrawal. I know. She told me I had done the responsible thing. Then she said there was no reason I had to keep drowning just because Allison was gone. I leaned against the porch railing. It was exactly my mother's style. Not threat, not bribery. A moral conclusion, followed by help that made the conclusion easier to live with. What did you think the help meant? I asked. That she cared. Do you think that now? Monica took a long time. I think she cared about some people very much. The answer chilled me. She continued before I could speak. I told myself the relocation proved I had made the right choice. I got a better apartment. I moved closer to work. For the first time in months, I could pay everything on time. Every practical thing in my life improved right after I stopped trying to take Lucy. I closed my eyes. And Lucy? She disappeared from my practical life. Monica's voice broke on the last word. I told myself not contacting her would make the placement easier. Diane said too many adults circling a grieving child could confuse her. Then weeks became months. I was ashamed. By the time I tried to ask questions again, I felt like I had forfeited the right. I did not comfort her out of that. She had failed Lucy. So had my mother. Those failures were not identical, and pretending they were would have been another kind of lie. Are you willing to tell my lawyer this if she contacts you? I asked. Yes. Only what you remember. Yes. No guessing about why Diane did it. I don't have to guess anymore. I almost asked what she meant. Then I stopped. Motive could wait. Sequence was enough. Diane had gone to the only relative actively trying to take Lucy. She had turned Monica's temporary instability into an argument for withdrawal. After Monica withdrew, Diane helped make Monica's life materially easier while reinforcing that she had done the responsible thing. Maybe my mother had believed every word she said. That did not make the effect less real. The next day, I received a short update from my lawyer. She did not tell me anything from the insurer's confidential file. She only confirmed what belonged to me as the person who had submitted source material. The outside review team had acknowledged receipt and could contact the sources directly. A preservation notice and cooperation requests had gone to Mercer under the policy process. The safety complaint had been accepted for intake. Whether a regulator opened a formal audit would be the regulator's decision. I read the email once. Then I closed it. For months, I had taught Lucy that truth was not something she had to earn from me by behaving correctly. Now I had to live by the same rule. I could not promise the truth would punish the right people. I could only stop helping anyone bury it. That evening, Lucy was at the kitchen table cutting paper into uneven stars for a school project. The blue backpack hung on the back of her chair because she had taken a sketchbook to after-school care. I sat across from her. I learned something about your first mom. Her scissors stopped. She had not asked me about Allison since I told her about Monica. Bad something? No. She looked suspicious of the answer. Something important. I chose the words carefully. When your first mom worked with trucks, she noticed some things that she thought were unsafe. She kept telling the adults she worked with because she didn't want anybody to get hurt. Lucy frowned. Like if a car has a flat tire? Something like that. Grown-up versions of that. Did they fix it? I don't know everything yet. She returned the scissors to the table, but did not cut. Did people get mad at her? The question surprised me. Why do you ask that? Because people get mad when you keep telling them something they don't want to do. 8 years old. No grand theory. Just playground-level knowledge of human nature. Yes, I said. I think some people did. Lucy pressed one paper star flat with her fingertip. Did she stop? No. She looked up. Even when they got mad at her? Especially then. Her face changed very slightly. Not a smile. Something steadier. For most of Lucy's remembered life, Allison had existed as a loss. A mother who died, followed by adults who moved Lucy from one place to another. Then Claire's version had placed another shadow over her. Difficult, angry, trouble. I did not give Lucy those adult labels. I gave her the fact underneath them. Her first mother had seen danger and kept speaking because other people could get hurt. Lucy picked up another piece of paper. Was she brave? My throat tightened. Yes, she nodded once, as if filing the information somewhere private. Then she held up a crooked star. This one looks like a potato. I laughed. It does. She added it to the pile anyway. That was enough. Healing did not arrive as a speech. Sometimes it was one new fact about where you came from, placed beside the old ones until the shape of yourself changed. 3 more days passed. The pressure around Mercer became visible only through the people who brought it to me. Claire stopped sending angry paragraphs and started sending nothing. Nathan called once. I did not answer. He left no voicemail. Mom sent a text that read, "You have no idea what you are setting in motion." I deleted it without replying. Then Claire called at 12:17 a.m. I was asleep. The phone vibrating against my nightstand pulled me awake hard enough that I knocked over the glass of water beside it. I saw her name and answered before the second ring finished. What happened? Her breathing was uneven. Are you alone? Yes. Lucy? Asleep. Another pause. Then she said, Nathan asked me again if I kept anything from 2023. I sat up. What did you tell him? That I didn't know. Did you? She ignored the question. Mom called me tonight. Every part of me became alert. What did she want? She asked whether I still had an old maintenance sheet. I said nothing. Claire's voice dropped. She didn't ask if there was one. She asked whether I still had it. The room felt suddenly too quiet. What sheet? I don't know what to call it. You do know, she breathed in. When the lender and insurance people were asking questions after the accident, there were packets. I signed things because I was corporate secretary and minority owner. There was a maintenance page in one of them. My pulse began to hammer. I forced myself not to lead her. What about it? Claire whispered. If there were 2 versions of the same maintenance sheet, would that matter? I looked toward the hallway. Lucy's door was closed. It could. Claire was silent. Then, very softly, she said, Then, I need to show you something. I did not sleep much after Claire's call. 2 versions of the same maintenance sheet could mean a dozen harmless things. A date could be corrected. A technician could finish work after someone closed the electronic order. A lender packet could contain an earlier draft, and an insurer packet a later one. I knew enough about claims work to know that inconsistency was not the same thing as fraud. But I also knew why provenance mattered. A page became evidence only when someone could explain where it came from, when it existed, who had received it, and whether another source could confirm the same sequence. Claire had not asked whether 2 versions were automatically proof. She had asked whether they would matter. At 10 the next morning, she came to my house carrying a white envelope. Lucy was at school. I had already decided I would not meet Claire at my office, not in a parking garage near work, and not anywhere that might blur the wall I had worked so hard to keep clean. My kitchen table had become the place where too many truths had changed shape, but at least it belonged to me. Claire stepped inside without taking off her sunglasses. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare, except for a little concealer under her eyes. She looked like someone who had spent the night listening for movement in another room. I asked whether Nathan knew she was there. He did not. Claire caught the way my attention moved to the envelope and told me not to read too much into her face before she had said anything. We sat at the table, and for several seconds, she kept both hands flat over the white paper, as if holding it down. Then she slid out a single sheet. It was exactly as unimpressive as important documents usually are. Black and white, slightly crooked. A photocopy, not an original. The top edge had caught a thin gray shadow from the copier lid. There were work order numbers, dates, unit information, maintenance status fields, initials I did not recognize. I did not reach for it. Claire put one finger near a status line. This was in a lender packet after Allison's accident, she said. There were insurance things, lender things, operating documents. I signed some of them because I was corporate secretary and I owned part of the company. You made this copy then? Yes. From the packet? Yes. Why? She looked at me for a long moment. Because I had seen another version. The refrigerator clicked on behind us. Claire explained that in the weeks after the crash, Nathan had brought home stacks of papers more than once. She was not reading them as an investigator. She was signing where she was told to sign, checking shareholder and lender documents, trying to keep their household functioning, while Nathan treated every new request as a threat to the business. On one maintenance sheet, she had noticed an open status carrying later than she expected. A later packet showed the same work order closed earlier. When I asked Nathan, he said the second one was the corrected record, she said. He said shop work had been finished, and the system timing was wrong. That can happen. I know. Then why copy this? Her thumb pressed into the envelope hard enough to bend it. Because I didn't trust him enough not to. The sentence seemed to surprise even her. She looked away. I believed him enough to stay, she said. That's not the same thing. I let that sit. She had kept the page with personal financial records, not in a secret evidence box. She had not spent 3 years preparing to expose Nathan. She had not contacted a regulator, a lawyer, or Allison's family. She had simply saved one thing that made her uncomfortable. Private insurance. Not for Allison, for herself. That distinction made Claire more believable and less innocent at the same time. Did you ever compare them again? I asked. No, I put it away. Did you tell anyone you kept it? No. Then how does Mom know? Claire's eyes met mine. That's what I can't figure out. I looked down at the photocopy without touching it. One page could not tell me whether the earlier status was accurate, whether the later one reflected a legitimate correction, or who had changed anything. But Frank had remembered maintenance dates changing after Allison died. Now Claire had a contemporaneous copy that might preserve one version of the timeline he remembered. Might. That word mattered. If you want this to mean anything, I said, you would have to explain where you copied it, when you copied it, what packet it came from, and why you remember it. Then someone independent would have to see whether lender or insurer archives still have the same trail. Claire's mouth tightened. So you think it matters? I think it could be tested. She stared at the page. You're not taking it. I wasn't going to. You're not photographing it. No. That seemed to unsettle her. You don't want a copy? I want you to decide what you're willing to do with it. If I take it from you now, this becomes another family handoff. That is exactly what it cannot be. For the first time that morning, Claire looked scared rather than defensive. She put the photocopy back in the envelope, but kept the envelope on the table. Claire left the envelope on the table and told me there was more. She had known before Allison died that Allison was threatening a complaint. She had never known every allegation, but she knew enough to understand that Nathan considered Allison a problem he wanted managed. When I asked about Frank, Claire's face changed before she answered. After the accident, Diane had said she had talked sense into him. At the time, Claire had accepted Mom's explanation that Frank was emotional, accusing people of things he could not prove, and needed to stop making an already catastrophic situation worse. The admission tightened every connection I had been trying not to overstate. Frank had refused to name the family-connected person who pressured him. Diane had already shown how she could turn another person's fear into something that sounded like responsibility. Claire had lived beside both facts and never forced them together. She admitted she had never seriously asked why her mother was talking to a Mercer employee at all. I laid out what she had just given me without dramatizing it. She knew Allison had threatened a complaint. She knew Diane had intervened with Frank. She knew at least 2 versions of one maintenance page had existed. And after Diane told her Lucy was Allison's daughter, she still kept all of that from me. Claire answered with one word, yes. And the simplicity of it removed the last hiding place behind ignorance. There was one thing she genuinely had not known. When I told her Monica had tried to take Lucy, the shock in her face was immediate. I gave her only the relevant sequence. Monica entered the kinship process. Diane visited her. Monica withdrew afterward. And Diane later helped arrange relocation. Claire had been told only that Mom recognized Allison's name because of Nathan. Now she understood that Diane had recognized Lucy's history too. For several seconds, my sister sat looking toward the hallway, rebuilding years of memory against facts she had not possessed. Then the barbecue came back into the room. Claire admitted the current review had already started. Nathan was panicking, and Mom kept warning that I could not be allowed to learn too much because I would make everything about Lucy. When I came through the gate with lemon bars, paper bracelets, and Allison's daughter running toward the children, Claire did not see an 8-year-old. She saw the old matter standing 10 yards from her husband. So, you made Lucy the problem, I said. Claire closed her eyes and said yes. She also admitted that calling Lucy a disruption had let her pretend the danger was a child showing up, rather than what she feared she might learn about Nathan. I told her she had made an 8-year-old carry what she was afraid to know about her husband. Again, she did not defend herself. There was no satisfaction in the admission. An apology could not put Lucy back in the yard before she learned to offer. I can be quieter. Claire said she was sorry. I believed that she meant it, and I told her belief was not forgiveness. The page she had brought did not erase the barbecue, and doing the right thing now would not rewrite what she had done then. Claire nodded. She did not ask me to soften it. Her phone buzzed on the table. Nathan. Claire looked at the screen and let it stop. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Answer it, I said. She looked suspiciously at me. I don't want to hear it. Go outside. Claire took the envelope and walked onto my back porch. I stayed in the kitchen. I could see her through the glass door but not hear her words. She stood with one arm folded across her stomach. Twice, she turned away from the house. Once she looked down at the envelope as if she had forgotten it was in her hand. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. When she came back inside, her face was gray. What happened? I asked him. Asked him what? Whether there had ever been another version of that maintenance sheet. I waited. Claire put the envelope back on the table. He said, there was never another version. For a second, neither of us moved. The photocopy sat between us, invisible inside white paper. That's different from saying one was corrected, Claire whispered. Yes. He used to say it was corrected. And now? Now he says it never existed. There was no interpretation I could give her that would make those statements identical. Claire stared at the envelope. I wanted him to say I remembered wrong. I wanted him to tell me what the correction was. Something. Instead, he denied the thing you copied. Yes. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Diane. Claire read it, went still, then pushed the phone toward me. I did not pick it up. The preview was visible from where I sat. Where is the old copy? Call me before you do anything. Claire's voice was almost flat. She asked where it is, not whether it exists. No, that was the fracture. Nathan had just told Claire there had never been another version. Diane was asking where the old copy was. The two people Claire had trusted to define reality for her were no longer giving compatible stories. Until that morning, Claire had been the person asking me to stop. She carried Nathan's explanations to me, Mom's warnings back to him, and enough uncertainty to keep herself between both sides. The photocopy changed that. Nathan could no longer reassure her with a version she had not witnessed, because she had witnessed this one. Diane could no longer pretend she knew nothing about old records, because she had named the copy without being told. For the first time, Claire possessed a fact neither of them could define for her. I watched the knowledge settle into her. Claire asked what she was supposed to do, and I refused to answer the question for her. She pushed back. I had been the one routing material to investigators. I understood the preservation notice, and I knew what could happen if the old copy mattered. I told her those facts were exactly why she needed independent legal advice. Hiding or destroying relevant material after a preservation notice could create problems of its own, but the moral choice could not become another instruction delivered by a frightened family member. She was not asking for procedure. She wanted me to tell her whether to hand it over. Every part of me wanted to say yes. Instead, I remembered Diane at Monica's kitchen table, taking a frightened woman's uncertainty and turning it into the responsible choice. Control did not become clean merely because I liked the outcome. I told Claire that if I ordered her to hand over the photocopy, she could spend the rest of her life saying I had destroyed her marriage. If I told her to hide it, I would join the same system that kept deciding which truth was too dangerous to survive. This one has to be yours. I could see why that frightened her. For years, Claire had survived by letting Nathan define the business truth and Mom define the family truth. Choosing now meant losing the protection of both explanations at once. The envelope had not changed weight, but the decision attached to it had. She sat with that for almost a minute, then returned the photocopy to her purse. Before she left, I wrote my lawyer's number on the back of an old grocery receipt and told her that if she chose to cooperate, she should not give the page to me. She could call my lawyer, retain her own counsel, and use the proper channel. At the door, she asked whether Frank or I had known she kept the copy. I told her no. That left the question neither of us could answer. How had Mom known enough to ask where it was? She left with the copy still in her purse. That afternoon, I called my lawyer, not to report Claire's page. It was not mine to report as if I possessed it. I told her only that Claire had raised the possibility of a contemporaneous personal copy and might seek advice or contact. My lawyer told me not to solicit it, not to store it, and not to put myself between Claire and the formal process. Then I asked about Frank. With his permission, she contacted him directly. The answer came the next day. Frank confirmed Diane had been the family-connected person he had refused to name. Not Nathan. Diane. My lawyer relayed only what Frank had authorized her to tell me. Diane had not ordered him to fabricate anything. She had done something more familiar. She asked whether he had personally watched anyone alter a record. He had not. She asked whether he wanted to accuse Claire's husband of fraud based on something he could not prove. He did not. She reminded him that reckless accusations could destroy a company, jobs, and a young family. By the time his final account was taken, Allison warned them repeatedly. There had been concerns. The underlying uncertainty was real. So was the pressure. My mother had understood how to make a person say less without ever instructing him to say something false. When I ended the call, I sat in my car outside Lucy's school and stared through the windshield. Diane had pressured Monica away from Lucy. She had pressured Frank away from the strongest version of Allison's warnings. Then, when Lucy entered our family years later, Diane had pressured all of us to accept a new boundary. Biological children inside, Lucy outside. Different situations, same instinct. Control the distance between inconvenient people until the story became easier to manage. Lucy climbed into the car 10 minutes later, carrying the blue backpack. She had taken it to school for her sketchbook. On the drive home, she asked, "If I meet Aunt Monica someday, can I bring this?" "The backpack?" "Yeah, of course. I could put drawing stuff in it." I glanced at her in the mirror. No emergency pajamas, no spare outfit, because she might have to leave. Drawing stuff. "That sounds good." She nodded and looked out the window. I did not tell her anything about photocopies or preservation notices or my mother's conversation with Frank. The truth belonged to Lucy. The burden did not. Near midnight, my phone rang again. Claire. This time I was awake. I answered without speaking. For several seconds, all I heard was her breathing. Then she said, "Mom wants me to get rid of it tonight." I sat up. What exactly did she say? That it was an old draft. A mistake. That nobody needs it. She said, "Don't hand them a weapon and call it honesty." I closed my eyes. Claire continued, her voice thin. She said I need to think about my children, my marriage. She said Nathan can fix the business problem if I don't make it impossible. Forced loyalty. The last version of my mother's favorite argument. Family first, with somebody else designated to pay for it. I did not tell Claire what to do. The silence stretched. Finally she asked, "If I get rid of it, will anybody ever know?" I knew what she meant. Maybe an archive somewhere held the same page. Maybe it did not. Maybe Frank's memory and the current pattern would still push the inquiry forward. Maybe the old version would vanish, with the one copy Claire had kept. I would not lie to make her brave. "I don't know what anyone else would be able to prove," I said. Claire breathed shakily. "If I do it," she whispered, "will anybody know I had it?" I looked down the dark hallway toward Lucy's closed bedroom door. "I will." Claire went silent. Then, very softly, she said, "That's what I'm afraid of." Claire did not destroy the copy that night. I knew that because at 6:42 the next morning, while I was standing in the kitchen packing Lucy's lunch, a message appeared on my phone. I still have it. Nothing else. No explanation. No promise that she would turn it over. No apology for making me spend half the night wondering whether fear had won. I read the 4 words twice, set the phone beside the cutting board, and finished slicing an apple. Lucy came downstairs in one sock, carrying the other. "Why is everybody awake so early?" she asked. "Some of us are awake," I said. "Some of us are apparently negotiating with socks." She looked down at her bare foot as if surprised to find it there. That small, ridiculous moment steadied me. For weeks, every new piece of the story had arrived, carrying the weight of the last one. Allison's warnings, Monica's withdrawal, Frank's softened statement, the altered dates, Claire's photocopy, my mother's voice telling Claire not to hand anyone a weapon. But the most important fact that morning was simpler. The copy still existed. Whether it became evidence was no longer my decision. 2 days later, my lawyer called. Outside SIU counsel wanted to take a source statement from me about the material I had submitted. They had also asked Claire, through the insured cooperation process and her own contact with counsel, whether she was willing to provide separate information. Separate mattered. I was not being invited into Claire's interview. She was not being invited into mine. We were not going to sit side by side and construct a family version of events. The people reviewing the material wanted to know what each person could independently establish. My appointment was scheduled for Thursday morning at an office suite in Dublin used by outside counsel. Claire's was 45 minutes after mine. Lucy stayed with her sitter before school. On the drive there, I kept thinking about how strange it was that the climax of everything might happen in a building with beige stone, tinted windows, and a dentist's office on the first floor. No courthouse steps. No cameras. No crowd waiting for someone to confess. Just a parking lot filling with ordinary cars. I arrived 20 minutes early because being late felt impossible. I sat in my car with the engine off and reviewed nothing. My lawyer had already told me not to rehearse myself into sounding certain about things I had only inferred. Say what you know. Say how you know it. Say what you do not know. That discipline had become the difference between truth and revenge. At 8:38, I saw Claire's SUV turn into the lot. She parked 3 rows away from me. For a moment she stayed inside. Then another car entered behind her. Nathan's. My stomach tightened. He parked near the curb instead of in a regular space. My mother was in the passenger seat. I had known Nathan understood Claire planned to cooperate. Claire had told him that much after the preservation requests became impossible to treat as routine. His corporate counsel had also been notified that outside counsel was scheduling insured representative cooperation and source intake. There was no mystery about how he knew the day mattered. Seeing Mom with him was different. It meant she had chosen where to stand. Claire got out first. She was wearing dark slacks, a plain cream blouse, and no jewelry except her wedding ring. She carried the same brown envelope I had seen at my house. Nathan was already walking toward her by the time I reached the sidewalk. "Claire," she stopped. My mother came around the other side of his car. I stayed where I was. This was not my scene to seize. Nathan glanced at me once, then focused on his wife. "You don't have to do this the way they want you to." Claire held the envelope against her side. "They asked me to tell them what I know. They asked because Lauren fed them a theory. My lawyer had warned me not to argue in the parking lot, and for once I did not need the warning." Claire looked toward me. I said nothing. Nathan noticed. His face hardened. "This is what she does," he told Claire. "She gets to stand there clean while you blow up your own life." Claire's fingers tightened around the envelope. He did not shout. That was what made his argument effective. He spoke like a man discussing payroll. He told her the company employed more than 100 people, that customers were already asking questions, that the lender had tightened communication, that one current mechanical failure had become an excuse to drag 3-year-old documents back into circulation. He said a preliminary maintenance sheet was not the same thing as a final record. Corrections happened. Statuses changed because work got completed. Paperwork caught up. Supervisors reconciled entries. All of that could have been true in another case. That was Nathan's strength. He never needed every sentence to be false. He only needed the true sentences to shelter the one that mattered. Claire listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Allison's accident was investigated." The same sentence we had heard again and again. Claire looked at the envelope. Nathan stepped closer. "If you give them an old photocopy with no context, you know what they'll do with it. They'll ask where it came from. They'll assume what Lauren wants them to assume." I finally spoke. "No." Both of them looked at me. "They'll test it." Nathan gave a humorless smile. "You really believe institutions are that pure?" "No. I believe that's why the copy can't stand alone." Claire looked at me. I added, "And you already know I'm not telling you what to do." My mother had been quiet until then. She moved closer to Claire. "Your sister can afford to be righteous," she said. "It isn't her marriage. It isn't her children's home. It isn't her company." There it was. Not denial. Allocation. Who had something to lose, and therefore, who deserved protection? Claire's face went still. Mom touched her forearm. "Think about Lauren later. Think about your husband. Think about your children." Nathan did not stop her. My mother lowered her voice. "Family comes first." The words landed so softly that for a second nobody answered. I had heard versions of that sentence my whole life. At Thanksgiving when somebody was expected to swallow an insult. At Christmas when keeping peace mattered more than naming what had happened. When Claire married, Nathan and Mom told me family meant supporting choices we did not understand. When Lucy was excluded from photographs because there would always be another picture later. Family comes first. It had always sounded like devotion. Standing on that sidewalk, I finally heard the missing half. First before whom? Claire did too. She looked at our mother. Who was family when Allison asked for help? Mom's hand dropped from her arm. Nathan said, "Claire, don't do this." She ignored him. Who was family when Lucy needed somewhere to go? My mother's expression changed. Not much. The same tiny tightening I had watched years earlier when I first said Allison Reed's name at my kitchen table. Those are not the same thing. Claire shook her head. I didn't ask if they were the same. Then what are you asking? I'm asking who counted. My mother looked at me, then back at Claire. I saw the calculation happen. She could deny. She could return to stability, clean breaks, frightened children, misunderstood paperwork. Instead, she was tired. Maybe tired enough to say the thing all her other explanations had been built to avoid. They weren't ours. Claire did not move. Neither did I. My mother seemed to hear herself only after the sentence existed between us. She immediately tried to repair it. Allison was Nathan's employee. Monica was a stranger. Lucy was a child. None of us even knew then. I was protecting the family I had. But the mask had already slipped. They weren't ours. That was the rule beneath the barbecue. Not biology. Not natural bonds. Not protecting children from instability. Protection belonged to the people inside the circle. Everyone else could absorb the cost. Allison, Monica, Frank, Lucy. Claire looked down at the envelope. Nathan said her name again. This time she stepped away from him. He reached for her elbow. She pulled back. It was a small movement. More final than shouting would have been. My lawyer came through the glass doors then, and stopped when she saw us. She did not ask what was happening. She simply looked at me and said, "They're ready for you." I looked at Claire. For 1 second, I wanted to tell her to come with me, to hand over the envelope, to finish it. That would have felt satisfying. It also would have given her somewhere to put responsibility later. On me. So I said the only thing I could. "This is yours." Claire's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "I know." I went inside. My source interview lasted just under an hour. It was much less dramatic than the parking lot. Outside counsel asked how I had first learned Mercer Fleet was connected to Allison. I described Claire walking into my workplace and blurting out Allison's name before I had opened any Mercer material. I explained my immediate conflict disclosure and screening. I identified which documents in my submission had come from pre-adoption records, already in my possession, which had come from Monica voluntarily, which were public, and which facts Frank had authorized me to pass along. When I did not know something, I said I did not know. Did I know who changed a maintenance status after Allison died? No. Did I know whether the difference reflected a legitimate correction? No. Did I know why Diane pressured Frank? I knew what Frank said she told him, and what he said changed afterward. I did not know what was in Diane's mind. Did I know whether Nathan personally ordered a record altered? No. The answers sounded almost disappointing. They were also honest. My lawyer had been right. The point was not to make my suspicion sound bigger. It was to make each fact survive without me. When the interview ended, counsel told me they might contact me again if they needed clarification. They did not tell me what Mercer had produced. They did not show me current internal records. They did not give me the contents of anyone else's interview. I walked back into the reception area. Claire was there alone. The brown envelope was still in her hand. Nathan and Mom were no longer inside the building. Claire stood when she saw me. "Did they ask about me?" "They asked how I knew you knew Allison's name." Her mouth twisted. So, the scream. The scream. For the first time in weeks, something almost like our old sisterhood passed between us. Not warmth. Recognition. I stepped aside from the doorway. Her appointment was next. Claire looked toward the hallway leading to the conference rooms, then back toward the glass entrance. Nathan's car was still visible outside. My mother was standing beside it. Claire's breathing changed. I wanted to tell her courage was just walking through the door while afraid. I did not. Lucy had taught me that adults sometimes turned speeches into another form of pressure. Claire looked at me once more. "If I do this, there's no putting it back." "No. My marriage might be over. I know. My kids could lose the house they grew up in. I don't know what will happen." She swallowed. "Helpful. I'm not going to lie to make this easier." A tiny broken laugh escaped her. Then she crossed the threshold alone. The conference room door closed behind her. I left. That was important. I did not sit in the lobby waiting to read her face. I did not make myself the witness to her choice, so I could claim part of it. I went to a coffee shop across the road with my lawyer and tried to drink something that tasted like burned cardboard. 40 minutes passed. Then another 20. My phone stayed quiet. At 10:41, Claire texted me. I gave it to them. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. A second message came. The copy. And a statement. Nothing about forgiveness. Nothing about what Nathan had said. Just the act. Later, Claire told me what she had been asked, not what anyone else had said. She identified the photocopy as the same sheet she had copied from a 2023 lender insurance packet she had signed as corporate secretary and minority owner. She described where she had been when she made the copy, why the page had caught her attention, and why she had kept it among personal financial papers. She admitted she had retained it for self-protection in her marriage, not because she intended to expose anyone. She also told them that Nathan later described the maintenance material as corrected, and that when she confronted him in the present, he denied there had ever been another version. The copy did not become true because Claire cried. It became testable because she supplied a path. Which packet? Which period? Which capacity she signed in? Which page looked different? Which later denial mattered? The rest happened without me inside the room. That was how it should have happened. Over the next several days, I learned only pieces that were appropriate for me to know. My lawyer told me the outside review had enough source information to seek archived attachments from the insurer and lender records retained from the 2023 loss and financing files. Claire's photocopy gave them something specific to compare, instead of a vague claim that dates changed. Frank was contacted through counsel and repeated what he had told me. Allison had raised maintenance closeout concerns before the crash. His first account described that history more strongly. Diane later pressed him to soften how much he tied the prior warnings to management knowledge. Monica gave her own account of Diane's involvement after Allison died. The current Mercer truck records were already subject to preservation under the present review. No single piece proved everything. Together, the pieces stopped behaving like coincidence. Prior warning. A maintenance exception that looked resolved before the physical trail matched. A fatal incident. A later representation with a different timing. Status trail. A witness whose account narrowed under family pressure. A present-day failure showing the same administrative closeout pattern. And now, a contemporaneous photocopy with a person willing to say when and why she copied it. That was the click. Not a revelation, a chain. 2 days after Claire's interview, outside counsel called my lawyer and then spoke with me briefly as a source. The wording was careful. They had identified independent archived material that warranted expanding the historical misrepresentation and coverage review. The matter would not be closed as a simple repeat of the 2023 conclusion. Additional questions would go to Mercer through counsel. Any insurance rights, recovery position, or coverage consequence would be handled under the policy and facts, not announced to me. The safety information had also moved forward for regulatory review through its own channel. Separately, Mercer's governance and financing people would receive whatever notices their agreements required. No one told me Nathan was guilty of a crime. No one told me he was going to prison. No one promised justice would arrive on my preferred schedule. What changed was harder to undo. He could no longer say there had never been another version and expect that sentence to end the conversation. That afternoon, Claire called me from her car. Her voice was empty. The board is convening an emergency review. I closed my eyes. Okay. Nathan says you got what you wanted. I wanted people to look at the truth. He says that's the same thing. It isn't. I know. The words came without hesitation. That was new. Then she told me Mom had called her a traitor. I said nothing. Claire continued. She said I chose strangers over my own family. I thought of the parking lot. They weren't ours. What did you say? Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said, No, I just stopped asking someone else to stand outside so I could stay in. She did not sound proud. She sounded exhausted. That made me believe her. When I left work that evening, Nathan was standing near the edge of the parking lot outside the office building, where outside counsel had scheduled a follow-up meeting. I did not know why he had chosen to wait there instead of inside. Maybe he was waiting for Claire. Maybe for corporate counsel. Maybe he had simply reached the point where every building connected to insurance felt like enemy territory. He saw me. I saw him. Neither of us approached. A few minutes later, Claire came through a side exit carrying her purse and nothing else. Nathan straightened. She looked at him, then she walked past. Not toward his car, toward a ride share, waiting at the curb. He did not follow her. I stood there with my keys in my hand as the car pulled away. For weeks, I had been trying to understand why my sister screamed when she saw me in my own office. Now I knew. She had seen two worlds collide before I had. My daughter's dead mother, her husband's company, my mother's buried choices, her own silence. Claire had spent 3 years helping keep those things separate. That morning, she had finally connected them herself. And once she did, there was no family left that could return to the shape it had before. For 3 days after Claire walked out of that building in a different car from her husband, almost nothing in my house looked different. Lucy still left one sock in the hallway every morning. The kitchen faucet still squeaked when I turned it too far to the left. Her school papers still arrived, in a wrinkled avalanche at the bottom of her backpack. That was the strange thing about consequences. In stories, the truth comes out and everything crashes at once. In real life, most things keep moving, while the structure underneath them begins to give way. The first official change came through channels I did not control. I had stayed screened from the Mercer matter at work, and I kept it that way. What I learned came from my own counsel, from public business notices, from Claire when she chose to tell me something, and from the effects that became impossible to hide. Mercer Fleet's board met twice, in 1 week. By the second meeting, Nathan had been placed on administrative leave from day-to-day operations, while the company responded to the insurer's expanded misrepresentation review and the safety inquiry. An outside operations officer was given temporary authority over dispatch and maintenance decisions. Nathan was still an owner. He had not been convicted of anything. No one led him away in handcuffs. But for a man who had spent years treating control like proof of innocence, being told he could no longer make operational decisions was its own kind of verdict. The company's insurer issued a reservation of rights on the current loss and began a recovery review tied to the representations surrounding the older file. Their broker started warning the board that renewal terms could become far more expensive if the maintenance control problems were substantiated. The lender tightened access to the company's revolving credit line and required additional reporting under its covenants. One of Mercer Fleet's largest customers suspended new routes until the safety review was complete. A motor carrier regulator opened a broader audit built around the current brake failure and the repeated pattern of work orders being closed without a matching labor or parts trail. There were no dramatic headlines. There were letters, meetings, canceled routes, and trucks sitting in a yard when they should have been earning money. That was what accountability looked like before anyone knew what the final legal consequences would be. My counsel told me only what I needed to know. The deliberate, record questions had been preserved for further review, and the historical matter was no longer being treated as a simple, closed story about a difficult employee and an unfortunate crash. That sentence mattered to me more than any promise of punishment. Allison had spent years inside a version of events in which every warning she made could be translated into evidence against her. Now the system had to look at the warnings again, as warnings. Claire paid for her choice almost immediately. She moved out of the house she had shared with Nathan and rented a smaller place close enough that her children would not have to change schools. She did not file for an instant divorce, and I never asked her to. By then, I had learned how dangerous it was to confuse a first decision with the end of a process. She separated. She kept cooperating. Her access to the lifestyle she had protected, so fiercely narrowed in ways she could count. 1 car instead of 2, no company card, no assistant arranging the small luxuries she used to call errands, and a stack of financial disclosures that made every shared asset suddenly feel conditional. She had done the right thing late. Late still had a price. Mom hated prices she could not negotiate. She called me 6 days after Nathan was placed on leave. I let the first call go to voicemail. The second came while Lucy was at school, and I answered because I did not want Mom deciding silence meant she could arrive at my door and create her own scene. Her voice sounded controlled, which usually meant she had rehearsed. She said the company was being destroyed. Claire's children were confused, and people were turning one bad period in the past into a crusade. Then she arrived at the sentence she had been building toward. She had only been trying to protect Claire's family, and everything had gotten out of hand. I stood at the kitchen counter with one palm pressed against the cool laminate, and understood, finally, what was missing. Not remorse, not even admission. A subject. Things had gotten out of hand. Records had changed. Monica had moved away. Frank had softened his words. Lucy had been excluded. In Mom's language, events kept happening without anyone doing them. "I'm not discussing Nathan's case with you," I said. "And I'm not discussing Lucy as if she was collateral damage." Mom went quiet. I told her there would be no visits with Lucy, no stopping by after school, bouillon cousin gathering, designed to force a public reconciliation, and no messages sent through children. If there was ever contact again, it would happen only if Lucy wanted it, as she got older, and only after Mom had shown accountability that existed without an audience. "You're keeping my granddaughter from me." That word almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how cheaply she had spent it. "You told her she wasn't one of the biological grandchildren who belonged together." I was under pressure. So was an 8-year-old. I did not need to say more. The boundary was not revenge. I was not asking Mom to feel what Lucy had felt. I was refusing to put Lucy back in a room where belonging could be granted and withdrawn according to what protected the adults. Mom tried one last route. Families survive things by staying together. "No," I said. "They survive when the people inside them are safe." Then I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I did not spend the next hour wondering how angry my mother was with me. I wondered whether Lucy wanted grilled cheese or leftover pasta for dinner. That change felt small. It was not. Claire asked to see me the following week. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes after I dropped Lucy at school. She had changed more than I expected in less than a month, not in some cinematic way. Her hair was still styled. Her coat was expensive. But she kept checking her phone like someone who no longer trusted any incoming message to be harmless. She told me she was still cooperating with counsel and the insurer, and that Nathan communicated with her mostly through lawyers except for matters involving their children. She did not ask me to tell her whether I thought her marriage was over. She did not say she had been manipulated into everything. That mattered. For a while we sat with our cups between us. Then she said, "I made an 8-year-old carry what I was afraid to know about my husband." It was the cleanest sentence Claire had given me since this began. I looked at her and remembered Lucy standing beside me at Mom's barbecue, trying to make herself smaller while Claire said she should never have come. "Handing over that copy doesn't erase what you did to her." "I know. It doesn't make you the person who saved this." "I know that too." There was no defense attached to either answer. Claire looked down at her hands. "I'm not asking to see Lucy." That, more than an apology would have, told me she was beginning to understand consequence. "I don't know what our relationship looks like after this," I said. She nodded. "Neither do I." We left separately. I did not hug her. I did not tell her everything would be all right. But I also did not leave feeling as if I had been forced to carry her guilt for her. For years, Mom had taught both of us that family peace meant the most uncomfortable truth had to be placed in the hands of whichever woman was most likely to absorb it quietly. I was done accepting deliveries. The harder conversation was not with Claire or Mom. It was with Lucy. I had told her that Allison had been brave. I had told her Monica had tried to take her. But I had not yet given her the whole child-sized truth. Monica had wanted her, and had still stepped away. Children understand contradictions before adults think they do. What they do not understand is why adults so often hide those contradictions behind simple sentences like, "Nobody could take you," or "It just didn't work out." Monica and I agreed that if Lucy wanted to meet, it should be small. No reunion dinner, no family audience, no emotional ambush disguised as a celebration. We reserved a little meeting room at a neighborhood library on a Saturday afternoon. It had a round table, 4 mismatched chairs, a window overlooking a row of maple trees, and a shelf of children's puzzles that had lost half their pieces. I told Lucy about the plan 4 days ahead, so she would have time to say no. She did not answer immediately. She sat cross-legged on the floor of her room with the old backpack open in front of her. For years, that bag had meant readiness. A sweatshirt, spare socks, the toothbrush she once refused to put in the bathroom, because bathrooms belonged to houses, and houses could stop belonging to you. Now she pulled out the sweatshirt and put it back in her drawer. "What do people bring when they meet an aunt?" she asked. "I don't think there's a rule." She considered that. "Can I draw if it gets weird?" "Absolutely." So she packed a sketchbook, a pencil case, 3 markers, and a small plastic container of crackers. She added a stuffed keychain rabbit she had stopped sleeping with months earlier, then looked at me as if expecting me to notice. I pretended not to. "On Saturday?" Monica was already in the library room when we arrived. She stood too quickly and knocked her knee against the table. Lucy stopped just inside the doorway. Monica did not move toward her. That restraint was the first good choice of the afternoon. Monica had brought 1 envelope of photographs and 2 old birthday cards. Nothing else. No documents about the case. No folder proving another secret. This meeting was not evidence. It was history. Lucy sat beside me instead of across from me. Monica sat on the other side of the table and told her that she looked like Allison around the eyes. Lucy frowned. "People always say that," she said. "What else?" Monica blinked, then smiled carefully. "You tilt your head the same way when you think somebody is being ridiculous." Lucy glanced at me. "I do not." "You do," I said. That earned the smallest smile. Monica showed her a picture of Allison at 22, holding a birthday cake that had collapsed in the middle. Another showed her in work boots beside an old pickup, one hand black with grease because she had insisted on helping change something she did not actually know how to change. There was a photo of Monica and Allison at a county fair, both sunburned, both laughing so hard neither looked at the camera. Lucy touched the edge of that picture with 1 finger. What was her favorite color? Green. But she bought everything in black, because she said green showed stains. What did she hate? People chewing ice. Lucy looked at me again. "I hate that." "I know." The questions stayed ordinary for a while. I was grateful for every one of them. A dead parent can become a monument if adults are not careful. Lucy did not need a monument. She needed a mother who had favorite colors, bad cakes, petty annoyances, work boots, and a sister who still remembered which song she sang incorrectly every single time. Eventually, Lucy stopped turning the photographs over. "Mom said you tried to get me." Monica's hands tightened together. "Yes." "You filled out the papers?" "Yes." "You looked for a place?" "Yes." Lucy's voice stayed calm, which was how I knew she had reached the question she had been carrying. "You really wanted me?" Monica did not reach for her. She did not cry first and make Lucy take care of her. "Yes," she said. I really wanted you." Lucy stared at the photograph between them. "Then, why didn't you keep me?" Monica breathed in slowly. "Because I was scared, and I made the wrong choice while I was scared. My life was messy. I didn't have enough money. I was afraid I would make everything worse for you. Adults told me stepping away would give you a better chance, and I let myself believe them. Did you stop wanting me?" "No." The word landed differently from every explanation that had come before it. Lucy's eyes filled, but she did not cry. She pressed her lips together and looked down at her sketchbook. "That was a bad choice." "Yes," Monica said. There was no defense. After a minute, Lucy opened the sketchbook and uncapped a green marker. "I'm still mad." "You can be. And I don't know you." "I know." Lucy stared at the green line for a few seconds, then asked, "Was my mom scared too?" Monica's face changed. "A lot. She was scared about money. She was scared about losing her job. She was scared people would decide she was the problem instead of listening to what she was saying. So she wasn't brave all the time? She was brave while she was scared." Lucy seemed to like that answer better than any version that made Allison fearless. She added another green line to the page. "That makes more sense." Lucy drew a line across the page. "You can tell me more stuff about my mom." Monica nodded. That was all. No miracle reunion. No promise that Monica would become another mother. No demand that Lucy forgive a woman simply because the woman regretted what she had done. They spent another 40 minutes talking about Allison's terrible singing and the time she tried to cut her own bangs the night before school pictures. Lucy asked if Monica had more photos. Monica said she did, and could bring them another time if Lucy wanted. On the drive home, Lucy watched the houses pass without talking. Her backpack sat upright between her shoes. At a red light, I asked, "You okay?" She thought about it. "I think so." That was enough. When we got home, she carried the backpack inside, dropped it beside the dining table, and ran to the kitchen because she had remembered there was one chocolate pudding cup left in the refrigerator. She did not unzip the bag. She did not check whether the sketchbook was safe. She did not move it upstairs so it would be ready if she had to leave. I stood in the entryway looking at it longer than I should have. A few days later, one of my aunts texted me. Mom was planning a Sunday gathering. She wanted all the grandchildren there, and apparently believed inviting Lucy now would demonstrate that everyone was ready to move forward. I read the message twice, then deleted the sentence I had started typing back. I did not answer for Lucy. That evening, while she colored at the table, I told her grandma had asked if she wanted to come to a family gathering. Lucy did not brighten. She did not ask who would be there, or whether the cousins wanted her now. She only asked, "Do I have to go?" "No." She looked at the page in front of her. It was a drawing of two women beside a badly shaped green cake. One had dark hair. The other had a speech bubble that said, "Stop chewing ice." Lucy tapped the marker against her lip. "Then I want to stay home." "Okay." That was the whole conversation. Sunday came. We stayed home. We made pancakes too late to call them breakfast, and watched a movie under the same blanket, even though Lucy kept stealing most of it. No one arrived to demand an explanation. No one was given the chance to perform acceptance for her. The world did not end because my mother held a family gathering without us. By then, the investigation was still moving. Nathan was still fighting the business consequences. Claire was still living separately and cooperating. Mom was still telling anyone who would listen that she had tried to keep the family together. None of those things resolved neatly, just because my daughter had finally heard the truth. But something in our house had changed. That night, I walked past the dining table and saw Lucy's backpack lying open on the floor. Inside were the green marker, the sketchbook, 2 crumpled cracker wrappers, and the photograph Monica had let her borrow of Allison holding that collapsed cake. There were no emergency clothes, no toothbrush, no spare socks folded for the next house. Lucy had gone to meet a piece of her past and come back without once asking whether she was still allowed to stay. The bag by the door wasn't packed for leaving anymore. It was packed for coming home.